What's up, guys? Rogue9 here, and welcome to the Hot Breach podcast. Today with special guest Parker Mackay Interro. I'm sure you'll all know him as one of the main faces of the casting team for competitive Rainbow Six, and also many of you might know him from Twitch on his Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Interro. Welcome, Parker. Thank you for joining us today, and especially thank you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule that you'll be having this week, no doubt.
I appreciate the invite. I'm sorry that it took so long. I was hoping to be able to get on here a little bit sooner, but it's no problem. You guys do a wonderful job. I was actually getting up to speed with the Fabian one. Unfortunately, I had to suffer through listening to him speak, but it was great content.
Do you know, I can't watch that one back because I was really quite drunk. Did you notice how drunk I was watching that? I don't even think I can see my screen. I shouldn't admit that, but I was...
I don't think anyone would have noticed.
I didn't. I was going.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing that nobody noticed, Pete? Like, it doesn't matter. You can be smashed, you can be sober, nobody notices a difference. Just Pete.
That's quite the compliment there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey guys, before we get into the rest of the podcast, I do want to thank Massdrop and the AKG K7XX for sponsoring this episode. The AKG K7XX is a really high quality set of headphones that I've been using for a while. I've featured them on my personal channel, and all of us on the Hot Breach podcast have been using them and really enjoy them. The big highlights for me are, first of all, the sound quality. If you're familiar with AKG, they make really high quality headphones, and this set is no different. The second thing that jumps out to me is comfort. These are the most comfortable headphones I've ever worn, and for somebody like me who plays several hours a day, it's nice to not get the headache that you get from uncomfortable headphones and feel like your headphones are clamping down on you. And that's what I really like about this. Now, with these headphones, they don't come with a mic. I actually have the Massdrop mini mic attached right now, which is an option for you guys who don't want to go with a separate mic, or don't want to deal with like a desktop mic. So keep that in mind. That is another product you can get through Massdrop. But focusing on the AKG K7XX, it's a really good headset. There's over 257 reviews on Massdrop's website with an average rating of 4.25, and you can get them right now for $199. There's a link that I'll have on the screen right now that is for the audio only listeners. It's going to be https://dro.ps/hot breach. That'll take you to the AKG K7XX. You can check them out. Again, $199, free shipping, and I really appreciate you guys checking them out and supporting the podcast that way. And thanks again, Massdrop, for sponsoring this episode.
All right, so yeah, we've got a really interesting episode for you today. The patch notes for Year 3 Season 4.2 are up, and that patch is currently running on the test server, so we'll be taking a brief look at that before we get into some of our meatier topics. Toxicity in Siege is still a very big topic as of this week, and I think, Parker, you did a stream last night about it, or sort of not very long ago. That's
I did one, I want to say a couple days ago, but I clipped it and highlighted it and shared it yesterday. So that's probably what you're referencing.
Okay. Yeah. So I've seen the VOD on your Twitch channel. That was really interesting to watch, and we'll have a bit of a discussion around that. I think there's also been quite a bit of a discussion this week around what a Rainbow Six World Champion is. So maybe we'll have a little bit of a look at that, not too much. Meta abuse has been a hot topic in Rainbow Six this week. And then I think while we have you, it might be interesting to talk a little bit about Pro League, about how challenging it is for you, especially now with Super Month going on, and maybe what can be done to improve the Pro League experience for the casters and players, and also for the viewers. And then, of course, as we can round it off looking at the Pro League results for the sort of the last two play days, and see how the season has started. And then maybe, as we have time, round it off with a bit of Q&A.
Yeah, you're giving me the easy questions, eh?
Yeah, I mean, we go by what is topical at the moment.
Right. Let's. Can I start it off with my favorite Interro story, just to set the stage for what type of a person Interro is here?
Yeah, go on.
All right, so
I'm worried.
This might embarrass you, but this is good. This is good. All right, so I'm in Paris. It's the last. Well, the finals of the Paris major are just concluded, and we've been there for like 4 days. All four of us were there, and after the finals, and this is true at every LAN event, pretty much, there's like an after party, and The after party consists of like the pros and like the ESL people and then like the devs. And we're kind of, as YouTubers, we're on like a different list there. So we're not invited to the after party, but it's something that I really wanted to go to because it was on like this boat. It was like this really cool thing. And like I've developed relationships with some of the pros. So I wanted to go hang out with them because, during the days that you're there, it's all business. So I was kind of bummed that I wasn't invited. And I'm walking down the street I'm in Paris and I run into Interro and he's like, "Hey, you coming to the after party?" I was like, I wasn't invited. Reaches in his pocket, literally hands me a golden ticket. I mean, it was a wristband, but it was golden. And I'm like, "Dude, you're the man." He's like, "No problem." He's like, it tells me where it is and stuff. So I show up and I'm walking into this boat. Again, it's in downtown Paris on the river. And there's Macy J trying to get on. Macy J doesn't even have a ticket to this after party. He can't get in. They're not letting him in. And he's like, "Flanked." He's like, how did you get this?" And I was like, Tara. So I walk in. First person I see is Justin Kruger. I'm like, "Hey, Justin, Macy J's outside. He wants in." I think Justin went and got him. But that's Interro. He's a good dude, and I think he's going to be a good guest for the podcast.
He was saying to me, if I do get to go to Montreal, I'm going to be his +1 for the after party at the Invitational, which I'm really happy about.
Securing your space now, are you?
Well,
that is intriguing. I can't say I recall that conversation. Maybe I was podcasting drunk. I don't know, but.
Righty-ho. So let's get this started with the patch notes, and this will be fairly brief because I think they're not super exciting. A lot of bug fixes that we're seeing, and in fact, I'm going to say that most of these changes are bug fixes. For instance, the bird box glitch is getting patched, which is a good thing. That's been kind of getting a little bit of a story recently, and it's quite an annoying glitch. For those of you who haven't seen it, there's basically some way in which you can bug out a certain part of the map, and then anyone who looks at that gets these odd artifacts all over the screen and you can't really see anymore. And I think it was actually Microwave Gaming who came up with the name Bird Box Glitch after the Netflix film, because if you look at it, then you basically die. So that's getting fixed. That's a good thing. There's a lot of changes around the sort of air jab and Artilla deployments, so the new gadgets in the game, which had a few bugs. Nothing really major or significant there. I think one of the interesting things we're going to be seeing is that Kaid's or also Nomad's recoil is getting addressed with the TCSG shotgun, which up until now, whenever you use a controller, whether it's obviously on consoles or even on a PC, the recoil for this shotgun, which is the single shot slug shotgun or the semi-auto slug shotgun, is much, much stronger, which is exactly the opposite of what you would want, right? So that's getting fixed. Finally, I think we can say. And that's pretty much all of the changes we're getting there. So a bit of an update, and I think a long overdue fix, certainly for the new shotgun. Anything that jumps out at you there, guys?
Isn't there something with the Claymore and the Nomad air jab now that it makes it a little bit harder to combine those two in an insta-kill?
Yes, so when an operator gets tossed by the air jab going off, as you fly, you actually destroy any gadget you come past. So I think Koros tested this, and I also showed it in a video. If the Claymore is too close and the operator actually touches the Claymore before landing, it won't get set off. It will actually get destroyed. So it will make trying to air jab people into a Claymore more difficult. Yes.
Shout out to It's Epi in the chat is saying that we're getting some balancing tweaks over the next few days as well. So stay tuned. But yeah, that's some interesting stuff there. A lot of stuff that's needed, I'd say.
I'm kind of bummed because the content that can be provided from the air jab Claymore combo is way too high.
True story.
I think that there's so much possibility just for fun with Nomad. And I mean, I can understand why. It's funny to see it in like casual clips and like meme content and stuff like that. But there's more real world, I think, implications to having that combo exist, especially when, Kaid and Nomad are both unlocked for Pro League play. And I think February or March, whenever the 3-month evaluation period ends there. So as sad as I am to see it go, I'm not too upset from a competitive standpoint, but still it's a bummer. And at least we'll always still have those clips that have been made so far.
And then maybe one thing maybe to talk about is current known issues on the test server. Some of them aren't a huge issue, like the death camera playback is at normal speed instead of being slowed down. There's missing frames when you crouch, which I think is also in the live version of the game right now. Alibi's Prisma has a low quality, again, not a huge issue, and some AI terrorist AI issues about them detecting players. But there are 3 known issues right now which I think are relatively severe, and they need to get sorted before this patch goes into the live version. Heavy rubber banding that can even stop you placing a gadget through a breached wall. Walls can become indestructible when hit in the same spot repeatedly. And also voiceover and ambient sound problems with them being too loud. And in fact, the patch notes then say in italics, we would appreciate any feedback you have on this. So that to me is a little bit of a worry, because we've seen sometimes small issues from the test server actually then also go on into the live version. And these first 3, they worry me. They really don't need to not come into the live version of the game, I think. I'm assuming you would agree.
Yeah, I mean, do you think this revolves around with Wind Bastion? They changed, or maybe it was shortly after Wind Bastion, they changed the destruction and the physical appearance of destruction. There was some changes with how that is. That where this bird box glitch and maybe some of this issue with the indestructible wall after mailing it a couple of times, did that somehow pop these issues up? I don't know. It just seems weird that this is stuff that we're seeing now.
It's a valid theory. My assumption was that the changes in terms of the breaching were visual only, sort of cosmetic rather than functional. But yeah, it might be. I can't say for sure.
I haven't had my ear to the ground on issues within the game outside of the stuff that's been brought to light by, I would say, a number of the pro players, issues that happened at the start of the season with things like Thermite and Hibana's hard breaching utility going off without making a sound, diffuser going down, without making a sound, all that kind of stuff. And so much of this game just revolves around audio cues and visual cues. And if you're failing on destruction, client-side destruction seems to be a massive issue at the moment. Anecdotally, over the last 2 weeks, I have never had as many pieces of barricades fail to fall out. And on my screen, I can't see through the door. On their screen, they can see through the door clear as day. That's a huge issue. And these types of things are fine from a casual perspective. They don't really ruin the experience that much, even though they are frustrating to play against. But when you look at competitive integrity, which is probably a phrase I will say quite a lot today, when you look at competitive integrity, you can have entire rounds thrown off because of one thing not working the way that you want it to. Even having the drones still making that jumping noise when you run by them. I don't know if any of you have experienced that.
Yep.
There's about a 50-60% chance that a drone is going to make a jump noise as you run past it. That's crucial for flank drones. That's crucial for intel inside a site in pre-plans and executes and post-plans. I don't envy the dev team having to sort through all of this, but as you mentioned, there appears to be a lot of bugs right now that are unfortunately having a disproportionate impact on the higher end player base.
Yeah, and it's even if you're just playing casual, just for fun, it's really frustrating when you go to melee some reinforcement on a window and just nothing happens. You can see the cracks, but it just sort of balances there and it doesn't fall. And then you can't melee it out of the way. It just sits there and you can't see anything. That's just super frustrating. And I mean, client-side debris is always sort of the key word that comes up. I would go as far as to say, really, window debris is something that annoys me intensely. I would rather have it literally just fall through the map. As soon as you hit it, it just melts away and is gone, rather than having sort of bits of glass and bits of sort of window and wood lying on the windowsill, forming this. Whether it's, I mean, I suppose as long as it was server side and everyone saw the same. Yeah, it doesn't. And as long as everyone would see the same, that would be one thing. But preferably, and maybe even simpler, I would just want it to disappear straight up.
The only downside to it disappearing right away is I think that when you break a door, you break a window, that debris that lands on the other side of it is a good indicator to defenders if something is open that you necessarily can't see from a long distance away.
True. Or that a vault cam was thrown or
exactly.
Something, yeah.
And so, I mean, I would be more inclined to put a timer on it. Same with bodies as well. Client-side bodies are a massive issue too, that I think often gets kind of just passed over. The amount of times that I've been killed by somebody that looks like they're inside the corpse of another enemy and I can't shoot them because there's no or at least not proper limb penetration, and I'll light up the corpse because the person lying inside of it just happens to not be in that certain part of that person's body. Or you've seen clips where people can't close reinforcements because there's a body in the way, but on somebody else's screen, they can close it because the body's not there for them. That kind of thing is endlessly frustrating, but I would prefer to see maybe a timer. So if after 45 seconds, they disappear would be great for me. But yeah, it's extremely frustrating, but I think that there is a competitive aspect to that too. I'm thinking about Fortress. The amount of long hallways on Fortress, it's much easier for you to see if a window or a door has been broken out by the wood debris on the ground than being able to run that full distance. And I think that that's something on bigger maps that does help balance the maps for the defenders. And I would be a little cautious to take that away.
That's actually a very good point. Maybe...
Let me ask you something on that subject. I'm sorry, on the subject of the bodies, because I've lost rounds before because of client side bodies with Hibana. Like they're laying over a hatch and I can't open the hatch because my pellets just bounce off. If they did something with the bodies to fix that issue, how do you think the community would react to that? And I ask that based upon how they reacted to removing blood smears.
The community doesn't react well to changes no matter what, especially changes that are done under the guise of improving play for Pro League. There is a lot of animosity between the two communities. It's very frustrating. I think that there's a big gap to be closed there. Obviously, podcasts like this really do help try and unite both sides of that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, my actual answer is I don't really care how they react to it, because ultimately the level of competitiveness matters more to me than appeasing people who don't play this game for, a long period of time or professionally. A possible solution then is keep the bodies, because there is good intel. Let's say, you kill somebody and 30 seconds later you rotate through and, oh, it's Zophia's corpse. Okay, we know who this is. I don't know if it's technologically possible or technically possible, but making it so that once a body is dead, it just does, it exists visually, but that's it. It doesn't have any penetration. It doesn't have a hitbox, nothing along those lines. So you can still see the image of the operator on the ground, but you can't interact with it. If you shoot it, nothing happens. There's no blood that comes out of it. Doesn't absorb any bullets, nothing.
I think that sounds like a really viable and useful solution. Something I was thinking of in terms of the window and door debris, maybe have some invisible force or kind of like a slanted invisible physics pyramid at the bottom, so that when you do have debris falling down a window, it doesn't land on the windowsill and sit there, but it just gets pushed out to the side, so you see it lying on the floor, but it doesn't stay in your way. Am I explaining that in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, you are. Yeah. It will always drop, basically. Yeah. If you hit the window, it will always fall. Like with predictable recoil, you have predictable breaking of the barricades where you hit it there and it will always fall on the floor and give you that little gap that you expect to see in the barricade.
Yeah, so that way you would always still have that as an indicator and as information that a window is damaged, at least, or partially opened or has been opened in the past, but you won't have the issue of the debris actually hampering you in any way.
I mean, debris do have some level of balancing. Think about Cafe Dostoevsky. Those windows are the map itself it's not a map that I will ever miss if it gets deleted from time and space, but it's also a map where that the white window debris that falls and kind of looks like triangles on the bottom of the windows on the third floor certainly acts as a balancing mechanic, because it's already notoriously easy for good players to spawn peek bad players on Cafe. You've got, anywhere from 3 to 5 windows on most of the different facades of the building to try and cover. And for bad players, that can be unmanageable, especially on console, where your sensitivity will need to be cranked up to be able to look at those windows quickly. So breaking those windows and going for a spawn peek, there is some kind of balancing mechanic behind that, where the debris makes it harder for you to be able to see out the window, but it works both ways. From perspective, it's a lot more difficult for you to look up and see, say, a doc who's got white headgear on playing behind all of that debris, because you might not be able to see them depending on the way that the debris falls and their headgear blending in with with said debris. So I wish there was another mechanic that was in place that would make it easier, but ultimately I'm a big fan of just getting rid of that debris to begin with, and also getting rid of Cafe as well, if we could.
Or a buff, Cafe buff. That's what we need.
Sure, just get rid of it in its current incarnation. I don't like it.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Pete?
I agree with the point that I actually feel that those the way that the debris holds there in the window is more likely to benefit the spawn peaker than the peaked, because obviously when you're close up to a small gap, it's going you're close to it, so looking through it, you're going to have a better field of view than someone who's further away looking up at that window who might not even see it's been broken. So I would just like a uniform system, no matter where you hit the barricade, like it will act predictably. I agree with what Interro said about the debris. It is a sort of a warning system and an alert to the other teams. So we'll keep that in the game, but have it so that you when you hit the barricade in a certain place, you know you can predict where the debris will fall. But then I suppose someone will find a way to abuse that in, like some way.
You know what's funny about this? We've literally been talking about window barricade destruction for like 20 minutes. That just shows the depth that is involved in Rainbow Six Siege. I mean, holy cow. When you can look at just one little thing and go this deep with it. I mean, this game is just insane. Like I can't help but sit here and think about that.
Yeah, and it's a very good point mentioning the time there. This is basically us rounding off the news of the patch notes for year 3, season 4.2. And I think it's now worth maybe moving on to some meatier discussions. As I mentioned at the beginning, toxicity is again, or still, a hot topic. And maybe, Parker, you had your sort of solo discussion. Maybe do you want to sort of give us a bit of a highlight on the opinions you brought forward?
Basically, it wasn't necessarily just a Rainbow Six specific discussion, although a lot of it was very applicable, especially around like operator balancing and the way that you could try and reinvent team damage, especially in casual, where I don't have the stats behind it, but I would wager that probably an overwhelming majority of team damage and griefing comes through casual, just because of the devil may care attitude and people playing on accounts that might be under level 20, etc. It was touched upon by that video actually that came out by Jaeger himself about the the dark side of Siege, and he does a lot of wholesome content, and this one wasn't really much of a surprise from the stuff that he's done in the past. The way I see it is, it's just that Rainbow Six tends to have an almost disproportionate amount of levers that griefers and trolls can pull to mess with you. There are a lot of games where griefing is quite successful, and it's been around since the early days. You go back as far as, Tribes, you go back at CS 1.5, you go back to, Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, etc. Like, griefing has existed forever. As long as you've had an online video game with anonymity and a lack of consequences, it's been there. Basically, my saying was that there's a couple ways to address it. Obviously, as somebody who doesn't hold a dev position, I don't know what the engine behind Rainbow Six is capable of. I don't know what mechanisms Uplay has, but things such as tracking team kills and team damage, putting in a forgive system, mirroring team damage in casual, so that if you shoot somebody, it does damage to you rather than to your opponents. Now, none of these systems will completely get rid of it. The phrase that I said in the video was, there is no silver bullet to toxicity. If there was, then most games would have adopted that. The problem is that, like I said, with Rainbow Six, you have so many tools at your disposal to be able to screw with your teammates. Team damage, downing them with cav, harassing them by destroying gadgets, revealing their position, running outside, leaving mid-game, etc. There's no shortage of ways to do that. And it's tough. And I think Rainbow Six is pretty lucky to, by and large, have a better community than most games I've played. And that's a perspective that I think is lost to a lot of this player base, is that they're very insular and they maybe don't play a lot of other games because there aren't a lot of other titles right now that do what Rainbow Six does. So maybe a huge section of this player base is completely consolidated inside of Rainbow Six, and they don't get to see other games like Overwatch or League or CSGO, where griefing absolutely happens. And in my experience, and the tough part of this conversation is that anecdotal experience or anecdotal, stories aren't really viable in an actual like tested setting. But my experience is that I get more toxicity in Overwatch. I've had more toxicity in League and Dota. I've seen just as much toxicity in CSGO and Call of Duty as Rainbow Six. We're lucky to have a good community, but there's steps that I think can be taken from Ubisoft, hopefully, to try and mitigate the amount of griefing. But also a big part of it is just, once again, it falls on the player base. since we've lost dedicated community ran servers, the moderation tools to clean up people who are literal garbage human beings, it's gone. You're basically in the Wild West. You get thrown into a match, you hope to God that you have good teammates, and you hope to God that your opponents have bad teammates. That's really the way it works. And there's no way for you to take care of those problems. Whereas I'm sure we're all older guys here. I'm sure we remember back to the days of Wolfenstein or, Day of Defeat or TF2, where these community servers were moderated by admins. People who were terrible people or griefers were dealt with very quickly. That doesn't exist anymore. So it kind of falls on us to also call out people and try and police that. And it falls on the streamers, unfortunately, as well, to try and highlight that, to try and get Ubisoft to take some action if they're not already doing so and they just haven't announced it.
Yeah, I think sort of you mentioned the Jaeger video. One of the most unfortunate things there I thought was sort of the attitude towards new players to the game who also happen to be celebrity streamers, quite large streamers. I find it so regrettable that the attitude that some people then have is, oh, you're new to this game and you're big and large and well-known, and then I'm now going to do whatever I can to make you feel unwelcome. Like, that's almost like a stereotypical hillbilly attitude of we don't like your kind around here. How and where does something like that come from is absolutely bizarre.
It's human nature, man. And to the end of the day, I agree with what Interro said. Like, there is no silver bullet to solving this solution. But one thing I do think and agree with again is that when you have these really massive streamers coming on board and playing the game and giving it publicity, then it would be nice if there was someone on hand if they're getting griefed, just to remove them, because it's good for the whole community to get this exposure. We sort of touched on this last week, Interro, talking about Toxicity. It's at the very end of the podcast, and the VOD of the podcast went up on my channel, and so many people said, oh, just mute them and just hide chat. Don't be so soft. PC culture gone mad and all that sort of like talk in my comment section. And, like to some extent, I do understand where people come from. I think people these days are way too soft and they're so easily offended by everything. But on the other hand, like, people are going in and like TKing people and downing people and, running around as Caveira. You can't get around that just by muting them in game or hiding the chat. We're not just talking about words. We're talking about like behaviors here. And then the other thing, like, that really annoys me with people is like they say, well, it's free speech. But yeah, that's true. But if I go into work tomorrow morning for my day job and I start using really unsavory language, I start calling up some clients and, using horrible language, yeah, maybe I can say that, but I'm going to be told, pretty promptly to, go home. If you want to use that kind of language in your own home, do it. But you're not in your own home. You're actually on like a Ubisoft owned or rented server, interacting with the game with other people, and it's just through their sort of anonymity that people do this. That's all it is. That free speech, I totally agree with it, but you've got to be ready to deal with the consequences for your behavior. If you just walk into a supermarket tomorrow and start saying that kind of thing, do you think that's going to be acceptable and people are just going to walk on by and say, yeah, that's okay? No, they're not. They're going to call you out. You might even get a fact round the head or something. Do you know what I mean?
In most countries, I'm sure, I'm no legal expert, but I think in most countries, by law, your free speech ends where other people's right to not be harassed or threatened starts, right? And that's personally something that I would also, as a concept, agree with. Like, free speech can go absolutely as far, but when you start threatening or harassing others, that's where where it has to stop. That's where your personal right has to end in terms of free speech. And I think, especially sort of when it comes to video games, yeah, it's the thing of being online, it's the thing of being anonymous. Apart from the Jaeger video, something that came up actually in my feed only yesterday was a video series on a relatively small channel by a girl called Spontaneous. She also has a Twitch stream. And sadly, I say, the most successful series on her YouTube channel is a video series called Oh My God, a Girl. And she's basically put together clips of what she has to deal with as soon as she opens her mouth in Siege to make a call out, to congratulate a team player on doing something, to thank them for a call out, whatever it is, the harassment that ranges from low-level passive-aggressive harassment all the way to literal, what I would consider threats that deserve police action, like literal rape threats and nonsense like that. It's disappointing and horrifying to see that. And I mean, I don't think any of us really have to sit here and say, well, don't threaten people, don't make rape threats, don't make anyone else uncomfortable. Those things are given. And of course, the people who do those kinds of things, the people who annoy others and who are trolling, they know that. But something I would like to highlight, something that this video specifically or this series also brought to my attention, is just sort of even relatively neutral comments or questions. They literally become water torture when it happens again and again and again. A small anecdote from me is I, for the last season and a half, have stopped playing under the name Rogue9. And one of the main reasons for that is because every game, every match for me started out with someone typing, "Are you the real Rogue9?" That's not an offensive question. That's not an aggressive question. That's not intended to annoy or harm or hurt me. But every match starting out with "Are you the real Rogue9?" It literally a drop of water on your forehead every minute. It's water torture. It drives you insane. And imagine you speak up as a female Rainbow Six player, and the first question is, "Are you a girl? Is that a girl?" Or even slightly more offensive, "Is that a grill?" So something I'd like to highlight is, like, if you hear someone on your team make a call out and it's a female voice, just keep playing. Just be normal.
Just behave normally.
Because even what you might think is, well, this isn't really all that annoying, this isn't harassment, this isn't threatening, even just that repetitive nonsense again and again and again, it drives you insane. I can say that from personal experience. Just don't do that.
Is this the real Rogue9 that I'm talking to, by the way?
Exactly.
I just want to make sure. I just wanted to make sure.
Well, we've met in person, so you know that it's me.
Yeah, that's true. It's actually something that the Russian Badger said as well, was that he plays under Smurfs, and Macy's actually commented on this a lot, was for a lot of people who are new to the game, they don't know that Uplay used to have the ability for you to change your name whenever you want. There was no cooldown on it. And a lot of content creators found this a necessity because people would recognize their name and would grief them and troll them and stream snipe them, etc. And it was the ability to change your name every day, every hour, every time you logged back in, was actually a huge plus. It was kind of like a budget streamer mode, because you could be incognito for a couple matches until whatever content you were publishing comes out, and then you just change your identity again. Unfortunately, I think this was the wrong measure to take, but I think that there was a change, from my understanding, to a 30-day limit for you to change your username on Uplay. And a part of this was done to try and stop the hackers, actually, who would literally leave a game, change their name, come back in. Well, as we all know, changing what affects the general player base usually doesn't affect the hackers, and they still managed to find a way around it. And the people who ended up being collateral damage in this scenario were streamers. And, Macy, Russian Badger, they're the only two content creators that I've openly heard talk about it. And both of them said it's almost impossible to get good content on an account that you get recognized on, because people play differently. People will stream snipe you. People will troll you. People will try and throw in your games. People will, get super sweaty, etc. And it just leads to a reduced experience for everybody involved. If not changing it back and getting rid of that 30-day ban on changing names, I would like to maybe see like big content creators get whitelisted, because stream sniping in this game is obviously a significant issue. For somebody like myself, when I stream with the lowest latency possible, because chat interaction is important to me. Now, a lot of people turn around and say, well, just put a delay on your stream. Well, I could, but that would kill interaction, which I think for a lot of streamers is their bread and butter. I'm not a pro player. When I stream, I'm not doing it to try and rack up, 15, 22 kills like Rampy did last night. My goal is to try and interact with chat and have a healthy community. And by putting on a delay, you weaken that. And it's also a sort of victim blaming too, right? And it's unfortunate, because as you mentioned, having any kind of reasonable discussion around toxicity in games, or parameters in which can be established to try and lessen the amount of toxicity, no matter how slight those may be, there is a not insignificant number of people who will take to the stockades screaming about free speech or censorship. It doesn't matter how slight it is. There are people who will immediately label you some PC social justice warrior because you don't like playing with people who team kill you over and over again, or because you get harassed because you sound like you may be of a certain religion or a certain skin color or a certain heritage or a certain gender. And it's endlessly unhelpful, because these people essentially validate the toxic side of the community by saying, well, just mute them. Well, muting them, as you said, doesn't stop you against team killing. It doesn't stop you against people who have other levers to pull to try and harass you in game. And it's really unfortunate that there is this big contingent of people who see any attempt to try and improve the user experience for the vast majority of the player base as this Orwellian big brother state that's going to crush your ability to be a free human in the 21st century. Free speech, as many people point out, doesn't mean your ability to be a dick online. It means that you can speak your opinions without the government prosecuting you. There is hate speech, which are laws established by certain governing bodies, states, nations, etc. As you said, that is basically your speech is free until it infringes upon somebody else's. And I think there's this big, I don't even know what to call it, in the background that grabs these topics and uses them ideologically to try and stave off any kind of progress on a societal level in regards to what we do and don't find permissible about the language that people use, which is a much broader debate. But they certainly latch onto gaming because right now, with anonymity and a lack of accountability in a lot of games, there are no mechanisms, or very limited mechanisms, to punish these people who essentially run amok and promote this filth, especially essentially online.
Well, I think that talking about free speech when it comes to your interactions in a video game is, if you're the one pulling that card about to justify your behavior, and you're pulling a free speech card in a video game, you need to recognize that where you're going may be wrong. But I know this sounds pessimistic. I'm over these people. Like I'm completely over these people. I'm completely over telling them, please don't treat girls differently in a video game. These people are scum. Okay, they're scum, and they're doing it under a condition of anonymity, whatever, how you pronounce that. And honestly, I'm over trying to rationalize with them. What I want to know is, how can we fix this? And there was a couple of things in your Twitch message where you talked about this at length that I really liked. One of which, probably my favorite thing, is that we need some type of community monitoring system within the game. Yes. And I think that's the fastest way, because there are so many people who love this game. There are so many people who want to help improve this game. And toxicity is a community self-inflicted wound. Let us self-monitor it as well. And I'm not saying that we should get to the point where the community can issue actually bans and stuff like that, but at least put something in place that allows any user, whether it's PS4, Xbox, or PC, to collect a clip, submit it to an area, have that clip community reviewed, whether it's for cheating, hacking, boosting, or toxicity. And then once it passes that community filter, it goes to Ubisoft. And then they can actually issue punishments based upon that clip.
Yeah, this was something that I talked about very briefly. When you have people like the Doc and Tim the Tapman and XQC and Josh OG and all these guys that are coming in, because Rainbow Six is quite literally exploding. As many people point to the player numbers and the views on Pro League as some kind of metric as to the success of this game, it's not very true at all. There were a lot of prognostications at the end of 2018 from significant esports people basically saying, or esports figures basically saying, that they feel like this is a make or break year for Rainbow Six, and they feel like it will likely be a make year. We have huge people with massive audiences that number into the tens of thousands who are trying out this game for the first time. And like most games, they want a solo queue because they want to be able to talk to chat. They want to be they don't want to be hindered, or not burdened rather, by teammates that they're playing with. And unfortunately, the solo queue experience in casual in this game is absolutely dreadful, and we need to be upfront and honest about that. one thing that struck me was that we all know that, you know, one of the most viewed streams, I think it actually might be the most viewed singular stream in Twitch history, was when Ninja played with Drake. Well, when you have somebody that is a global icon that is literally transcending genres and markets to come play your game, Epic was literally on hand watching that entire stream, dealing with problems on Drake's end, dealing with connectivity issues, likely monitoring chat and the game. When you have somebody coming over, like XQC, like the doc, with literally 10 to 20,000 viewers, and there's no backup whatsoever, there's no support whatsoever, and these people are being harassed, team killed, shouted at, sworn at, etc. It sets a very bad example. And look at Overwatch as a really great shining light. A big part of what drove so many Overwatch streamers away were repeated stream snipers, repeated trolls and throwers. Tim the Tatman ended up playing the same one-trick griefer Symmetra on Overwatch, something like 6 or 7 games in a row, who literally did nothing but feed and ruined, I don't know, how long are 7 games in Overwatch? An hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on how long they go, of his experience and his content. It hurts his livelihood and hurts his chat and hurts his stream. And where was Blizzard? Completely silent. Having people, as was noted, having people from Ubisoft or Uplay or whichever body deals with the bans on hand when these huge streamers play, just monitoring Twitch or monitoring Twitter to see, would send a massive message to trolls and to streamers that, you know, you'll get punished for doing stupid things, and we've got your back if you decide to try our game. It's not the perfect solution, but I do think it's one that ought to be looked at. And there will be blind spots. Weekends, for example, Ubisoft employees don't work. Obviously, can't really deal with that. But in addition to having like what you're essentially explaining, by the way, is also is the Overwatch system in CS:GO, as I'm sure you're probably aware. Having community monitoring as well would be massive steps in the right direction.
To play devil's advocate, why should a streamer receive special treatment for toxicity whenever I still have to deal with it?
Easy answer. It filters downwards, number one. And number two, as much as I hate to say it, your experience online is going to be tough no matter what. But the message that it sends to tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of new gamers and prospective buyers of your product is very, very important from a bottom line and an economic perspective. And those people that are stream sniping the new players are probably also ruining your experience as well. So those people that are getting caught out and are getting banned and removed, there's a good chance that they're doing a lot more than just harassing streamers. They're probably harassing other people. And yeah, it's going to be slow going at the start, but it sends a message. And speaking of, I would love to see numbers behind the chat filter, because as I touched on in my talk, just from Reddit and Twitter and Discord, the amount of people that said, oh, I just turned chat off now because I don't want to get banned. Good. If those people can't not just drop an N-word in chat and they need to turn off chat, that's a victory for the game, in my opinion. Whether they get banned or not, really besides the point, but you've essentially removed the likelihood of somebody going off in chat, which is going to hopefully make the experience better for everybody.
I think maybe one thing to mention in terms of why should these large streamers get a different treatment or get more protection, I think it's also fair to mention that they are more of a target. Right, I suppose any new player could get harassed, like, why are you level 23 and you're trying to join us? And some people get targeted. Some people create a second account and they're actually extremely experienced and they go into a game, and because they're a low level, they'll get targeted and harassed and team killed, stupid things like that, vote kicked, goodness knows what. Yes, it does happen for everyone, but I think certainly from what we've seen, like, larger celebrity streamers are more of a target. So I think it's fair enough to start there as an addition.
And like encouraging these people to come over to Twitch, whether it be Dr. Disrespect or whoever it is, I think there can be a tendency for people to think that how does it benefit them? But the continued exposure of the game ensures that you have a healthy game to play, because people are always going to be leaving Rainbow Six Siege to go and play other games, whether that be, I don't know, Fortnite, the new Call of Duty, whatever it is. So you're always going to need new people to come along. Now I think the stats are something like 30-odd or 40-odd million people play Rainbow Six Siege. But if we're being real, it isn't that number. It's that number have picked up the game since it released. And we need to always have new people coming in to ensure that the game stays alive and continues to thrive. And that's just one part of it. When you have a successful streamer that that isn't playing Rainbow Six Siege and brings a brand new audience with 20,000, live viewers constantly for hours on Twitch over, that's really helping the game and the word of mouth. And if people see their favorite streamer enjoying it, then it encourages them to come along and play the game. So that's why, we talk about, or Interro talks about this idea of perhaps just having someone from Ubisoft that monitors the streams, and just if there is someone being an arsehole, get rid of them, take them out of that game. And yeah, it kind of sucks.
Free advertising, right?
Yeah, it is free advertising. I know it sucks for the average person who's getting, like, I hear a lot of comments from people that play on console that this is just really, run of the mill all the time. They're getting griefed, they're getting TK'd. I know, because I think the first game I ever played on console, I got TK'd. So I immediately thought, damn, like this is the real deal. I know it sucks, but it's a start at least to, moving Siege in the right direction and encouraging streamers to come over and stick with the game. We've probably all seen that clip of Dr. Disrespect going, well, I don't think a lot of Rainbow Six Siege when he gets TK'd. And imagine if we all saw it, like those people in that game welcomed him, he might have been streaming it more and more, and that would have been really good.
And the
Rainbow
difference
Six
is
Siege
huge.
is a punishing experience to begin with. You don't need the toxicity to add on to that.
Can I just say one more thing? Just one, like, really quick, Flanked. Actually, I just want to say this is not the majority. And actually, like, I hear stories all the bloody time about really cool people welcoming new players, helping them out, telling them where they can put a reinforcement, encouraging them. So I don't think any of us are trying to say that this is the entire, it's just really small percentage of people that let the whole community down, basically. Sorry, Flanked.
No, I just wanted to say, I mean, I remember as a new player, like, this is a daunting experience to, especially on console, you're used to playing a Call as some type of aim assist or something. You step into a game where you've got all this destruction, unique operators, repelling, no aim assist. It's a tough experience to begin with. You throw, team killing or something like that on top of that, it can be really frustrating. And it can also, if you don't see any punishment come from it, you also think, well, this is just this game. This is how it works. So once I'm not a new player anymore, this is how I need to treat a new player. And that's not a good cycle to continue.
A perspective that's lost on PC players that a lot of people don't know, because console makes up an overwhelming majority of the player base, which is also something that PC players seem to forget quite often, is that you can have up to 12 accounts, I think, on PlayStation alone that all have access to this game. Yeah. So you can literally go in, you can team kill a whole bunch of times, you can get a cooldown, hop on another account, rinse and repeat for hours, just continuously evading bans with all of these accounts. There's no disincentive to do this. And as many people have rightly pointed out, IP bans are completely ineffective. I don't know if it's possible, but bricking consoles from playing this game would be extraordinary. It's similar to hardware ID bans in the sense that, a hardware ID ban is it's possible to get around it on PC, obviously, but it usually requires a lot of money. When you have somebody who's getting routinely banned, I don't know if Ubisoft has access to see the actual console that it's being played on. But if you can look online and see that, hey, 6 accounts on the same console are getting banned over and over again for team killing offenses, I have zero problems with just removing that console from being able to play. The problem is that if somebody turns around and sells that console and you want to play Rainbow Six on it, you're out of luck. That's a huge bummer. But what other mechanisms are there? One of the main selling points and main features of consoles are that you can buy a console and 5 of your family members or friends can all play off of it without having to buy 5 copies of the game. I don't have a problem. Low priority
queue would answer so many of these problems. That's and I don't know how feasible that is on console. I know, I've played a little bit of Dota 2 that answers a lot of their toxicity problems with a low priority queue by sending players there. I think, man, if we could institute a low priority queue in this game on both console and PC, it would answer so many of these problems. You still allow people to play a game that they paid money for, but they're playing it with other toxic people. And I love it.
Speaking of repeated team killing, wasn't there a toxicity update I'm going to say 6 months or so ago, quite a long time ago, that said that going forward, team killing would be tracked across games so that you'd have a running total, and if it got to a certain degree, you'd get reviewed and punished. I've not heard anything about that since the initial announcement. I'm assuming that's in the game now, but I've never really heard a story of, yes, we're dealing with X amount of people because of their racked up, because of their accumulated team kill number, rather than just the 2 kills and you're out for the game.
I mean, UB does a lot of stuff in the background, right, that we don't know about. This chat filter just didn't come out overnight. I'm sure that this was probably an endeavor that took months for them to try and work. And I'm glad that they changed off of the insta kick feature. I defended it, obviously, because I thought that it was better than nothing. But I definitely think that there was, and there still are, better solutions. I think that the one that they have in place right now, where it just doesn't send your message, is a big step forward and doesn't really catch innocent people in the crossfire. But yeah, I don't know what's going on in the background. The thing is that Ubisoft has been so upfront and so transparent on a lot more than most developers that I think you see this in the pro community as well, that people get a little too expectant about updates on what's happening. You know, you look at Call of Duty, you look at CS:GO, you look at League. The developers behind these games don't really tell you what's going on. They don't really give you feedback and updates. And people like to compare Ubisoft to these small independent studios that put out weekly content pieces about what's being developed. But part of that's a strategy. These small indie games need to sell you on the confidence behind their product. So those developer updates that come out every week is actually a marketing strategy for you to have buyer confidence in a competitive marketplace that what you were buying will continue to be supported, be it in early access or not. Ubisoft is a massive AAA developer. They don't owe us anything. It's smart business for them to put out updates on what they're doing. But when you're dealing with toxicity and bans, I'm of the opinion that the less said, the better, because the more that gets said, the more information that griefers, hackers, cheaters, etc. have to get around those walls that are set up in place to try and box people in. The less information, the less tools and knowledge at the disposal of these people, and the harder they have to work to try and get around it, which is exactly what we want. We want them to have to work to try to get around it and ultimately, hopefully, fail.
That's a fair comment, I think. And maybe with that, let's move forward to maybe a slightly lighter topic. Rainbow Six World Champion. Who is that? And why is this a big topic right now? Because I was looking at
how many have there been?
There's been loads. I was looking at the Rainbow Six website for the Invitational today, and it's the official Ubisoft website, and on there it describes the Invitational as whoever wins that is the world champion. So that's one opinion, shall we put it that way? What are all the other opinions? Interro, tell us about that.
I saw a bunch of people on Twitter arguing about Liquid being world champions, and I had thought that this debate was settled back in March/April of last year, around the time of the Invitational and shortly thereafter, that due to the way that this game is now competed, or the way that people now compete in this game, that the Invitational would be considered our most signature and marquee event, worthy of a distinction as the World Championships. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's the largest event. It's in Montreal, where Ubisoft, Montreal is based out of, where this game was created. It's a truly global affair. It has the largest prize pool. Typically, viewership is the highest it's ever been, yada, yada, yada. There's a reason why the Invitational is seen as the crown jewel of this game. And to me, if you're going to have a World Championships, that's going to be it. But there's a couple things that work against this, and a lot of it, honestly, comes down to egos and hurt feelings. I sent out a snarky tweet that was supposed to be really sarcastic and not to be taken fully seriously, basically saying like a beginner's guide to being a world champion, win the Invitational. That's it. Like that. It was intended as tongue in cheek, because I saw a bunch of essentially Liquid fanboys arguing on Twitter. And then there were FaZe fanboys arguing against them, basically being like, Liquid's a world championship team. And then FaZe was like, no, they're not. They won a pro league season. So I sent out that tweet, and I didn't really anticipate drawing the ire of an entire fan base / nation, but it sure woke them up. And I got a lot of very interesting messages in Portuguese that I feel like I was a scribe trying to use Google Translate to the best of my abilities, learning an awful lot about myself in the process. I don't think that the Pro League finals are a world championship, straight up. People will turn around and say, well, you compete against teams all over the world. You do the same at DreamHack. If you win DreamHack, is that a world championship? Certainly not. I think that when you look at something that is worthy of a weighty distinction, such as world champions, it needs to be a global event, absolutely. But on top of that, it needs to be the top, most competitive, and most distinct and prestigious award. That's it. And it needs to be that kind of competition too. The Invitational is the trophy that most people want. I mean, most players are going to say they want to win everything, sure, but the Invitational is the big one. The fact that the Pro League finals give you qualifier spots into both the major and the Invitational, right off the bat, it rules out the fact that it's a world championship. You can win it against worldly competition, but it is not the world championship. That's the way that I see it. And then when the French woke up a couple hours later, because I sent this in the middle of the night EU time, the French woke up, and then a lot of Youngtis fans got really, really frustrated, including, Seascat, who played on that Youngtis squad. Prior to the first Invitational, Ubisoft and ESL in their official communication referred to the Pro League season finals as world championships. Now, I have a couple problems with that. Number one, it was literally 2 regions, and it was 4 teams competing for that honor. That's it. That alone, not worthy of world championship in my opinion. And when you're running shield recruits on plane and house in your semifinals and grand finals, I think we can turn around and look back and say, yeah, we've come a long way. You could have had that distinction back then. And sure, if you want to call yourself a world champion, knock your socks off. But to me, I don't see it that way. In my opinion, there have been 15 world champions, the 5 members of Elevate, the 5 members of Continuum, and the 5 members of Penta. And if we end up expanding more globally and there becomes an event even larger than the Invitational, let's say we expand Pro League to India or China or South Africa or the Middle East, etc., then the definition will change again. And that's the thing with definitions. They're fluid. This game is growing. It stands to reason that what we consider to be success is going to change and grow as this game gets more complex, the competition gets fiercer, and more markets get introduced. So a lot of it was just people not wanting to admit that their favorite players, their favorite teams, their own successes were not worthy of being denoted as world champions. And I think that's really where it came in. And egos are a funny thing.
Yeah, I think no one can deny the passion of Brazilian sports fans, whether it's actual sport, in real life sport, or esport. They are certainly very much in favor of their local teams. And to a degree, that's a good thing. When it sort of transitions into attacking others, maybe that's a step too far, but who am I to judge that? But I think, you make perfectly valid arguments there.
Yeah, like that. I do agree with that definition. I think perhaps where their point of contention comes from is because perhaps before the Invitational came around, the language around winning one of those seasonal finals was more like that. So perhaps to those fans and to those players, it feels as though they've won something, and that title, in your expression on Twitter, perhaps they feel as though you've taken that title away from them. Not the award, but that feeling of being a world champion. But what I would say in response to that very point is that Siege isn't like the bloody Football World Cup that's been around forever. And we have this set of rules that change every now and then. Siege is growing and developing, and these tournaments are coming along, and we're sort of defining ourselves as the game grows. And I think that they're perhaps a victim of that, the fact that as we're growing and defining ourselves, things are changing a little bit. But I mean, like, if your country won the World Cup in football, and then we said, well, we kind of changed the rules, you're Canadian, right? So
yes.
Canada, you didn't win that World Cup. Like,
oh, hell no.
But that's perhaps kind of how they feel. But I suppose they are a victim of the fact that, Siege is a sort of growth esport, and we're defining it more and more as time progresses.
Fair enough. Another hot topic.
That's my thought process. But I do agree. I do agree with the definition.
Good.
I mean, the way that I see it is, it's just like there's always these old timer purists who, we're even seeing it right now in the Pengu Rampy debate. Rampy dropped 22 kills in 12 rounds last night and took over indisputably the title of most kills in a single map of Pro League. There's no way around it. Now, there are people some of whom are Pengu fans and have a vested interest in him retaining this record, who are turning around and saying, well, actually, and it's like, no, not well, actually. Pengu got 20 kills, 21 if you count the rehosted kill, which I don't, because the round was called dead. It got rehosted. So 20 kills in 10 rounds. That's more efficient than 22 and 12, obviously. And that's very impressive. It was also against one of the best teams in an entire region on LAN.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing so primarily on non-fragging operators. So if you want to try and justify his success or compare his success, then by all means do so. But the type of people who are coming in saying, well, actually, no, there is no well, actually. It is indisputable. Rampy holds the distinction as the person with the most kills in a single map of Pro League. Yes, the rules have changed. Yes, in 10 rounds, Rampy also got 20 kills. So technically, at worst, using your criteria, not yours, but their criteria rather, he tied Pengu's record. And yeah, it wasn't done on LAN, which pros and cons. A lot of people say that playing on LAN might be more tough in terms of a competition, or tougher in terms of competition, but the game is more fluid and you'll hit more shots that you might not hit online, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't like to get into these 10 debates because it's the same thing as baseball. People turn around and will say, oh, well, so-and-so hit, 60 home runs. Or somebody turn around and be like, oh, they hit 20 home runs. This was back when blah, blah, blah. Or for hockey, for me as a Canadian, people turn around and be like, yeah, well, Wayne Gretzky this, Wayne Gretzky that. And it's like, yeah, but Wayne Gretzky was putting up, 200 plus points in an era where the top 20 scorers were also putting up 100 plus points. Whereas nowadays, most people barely reach 100 points at the top of that leaderboard. So yeah, you can kind of put into perspective how impressive a record it is. This day and age, the game is a lot harder to play, in my opinion, than when Pengu did it against Font. Is Reciprocity as good of a team as Font is? I'll let you decide that. That's not something for me to weigh in on. But it's very frustrating because it's like people have a vested interest in their point of view being right. We see it everywhere. We see it in fanboys on, for phones. We see it in the console wars. People want to feel justified in their opinions, and they will bend logic to try and get to reach that point. But I think if you look at it, in my opinion, from as unbiased a perspective as possible, I think that the distinction of world champions are held for invitational, and that's where the argument ends.
That's fair. I think that's fair.
I think that for the Pengu fans out there who want to hang their hat on Pengu still having the most kills, just say that Pengu still holds the record for most kills on a single map at LAN. That's something you can still claim and still put a lot of pride in. I mean, when you're playing at LAN, you're playing for the big bucks, So I don't see why you can't say that with pride. I don't honestly understand that, but shout out to Rampy for a heck of a performance, and they needed it. I mean, how crazy is it that he does that? And yeah, anyway, we'll get into that later, I think. But
yeah, fair enough. And I think you've clarified that quite well. A topic again this week has been meta abuse, and I think Flanked, you started that off with a video, but I've also seen then follow-on discussions on Twitter, quite interesting, and that is it's the concept of, is that an issue in Siege? Is it really, if you pick the most effective operators as a team, is that hurting the experience? What would be the issues with that? I mean, maybe you lead us off on that.
Well, I don't like the term meta abuse because in my opinion, when you talk about meta abuse, you're basically asking the community to balance the game instead of the developers. And ideally, you have a game where there is no such thing as meta abuse because everything's in perfect balance. How realistic is that? That's tough. But yeah, I mean, I've played several games in ranked where you run up against a team that runs Finka, Blitz, Ash, Lion, and Dokkaebi and uses it in good coordination. And that feels abusive to me because I don't feel personally that is the way that this game is intended to be played. I don't feel that the developers ever at any point said, we want this to be the future of Rainbow Six Siege. I think this is something that kind of got away from them with the induction of Lion, Finka, and Dokkaebi, and all three of them having push button global abilities. And, the fact that Finka has a unique effect on Blitz and him being a 2-speed now. And I just feel like it's something that kind of crept up on us. We've arrived at a point where this team comp is possible. And I don't blame the people who play it. It's in the game. It's not cheating. But yeah, I guess if we're going to call anything meta abuse, that's it. And I personally have the impression that the only operator in the game that's toxic, in my opinion, is Lion. Now, when you run, and I say that because Lion is clearly broken enough to be banned in Pro League. So Lion, you can point to evidence and say Lion is broken. So my attitude with Lion and ranked, I will not use him unless the other team pulls him out first. That's my attitude on Lion. But with that said, I don't consider Dokkaebi to be toxic. But when you combine Lion, Dokkaebi, Finka, Blitz, and Ash, yeah, okay, now we're in toxic territory, in my opinion, or meta abuse territory.
I don't like the term meta abuse because if you actually refer to the meta of the game, these operators are not really in it.
True. Yes.
Yes. And I think that's really interesting. I think meta abuse sounds good.
Right.
But if you really look at like the top level of play, by and large, especially in a competitive standpoint, your meta is like Thatcher, Ash, Thermite, Hibana, Zofia. Right. And
although, I mean, you've been seeing some Blitz, some Finka. I mean, no, sure. Your point's taken. Yes.
Sure. But I mean, I think it's the meta of ranked. And I think you really hit the nail on the head here, which is that if we are to hit that very coveted and fabled 100 operator note that Ubisoft seems to have brought up a couple times, the issue is not necessarily those operators in a vacuum. It's all of them combined. Jackal is fine. Jackal plus Lion plus Dokkaebi is not fine. Jackal plus Lion plus Blitz is not fine. But Jackal alone, I think quite manageable. In fact, there's a lot of bad Jackals out there. You can bait him by knowing where you ran and knowing where he's likely going to come from. There's counterplay to his ability and to his gadget. For me, my perspective is, and I've been very straightforward about this, I think that global abilities have zero use in this game, period. And I don't think there should be any experimentation there. It's one of the few things where I am going to be an absolutist on. I don't usually believe in absolutes. I think there's a lot of gray area for a lot of things. But global abilities offer very limited counterplay, insufficient counters. They're not particularly enjoyable. And I find it funny because a lot of people in Twitch chat, in Discord, on Reddit in particular, and on Twitter will say, the Lions win rate actually isn't that high, or Finka's win rate isn't actually that high, or etc. And it's like, it doesn't matter what their win rate is. It's not that they are broken from a win perspective. It's that they're unenjoyable to play against. Siege, for me, from its very inception, revolved around the ability to play and the counterplay between room to room action. This is a close quarters combat game. It's very hard to spectate because of that. It's very hard to keep track of because of that, because things can be very swift and you can take one room and that's it. And just taking control of one room on a map can be the difference between whether your attack is successful or your defense ends up being successful. When you look at a global ability, there's no real counterplay. Lion is not vulnerable while using it. He can be in spawn for both of his charges. Same with Finka for her 3 charges. Same with Dokkaebi for both of her calls. It's very frustrating to deal with. And I think that there are significant worries about power creep. Why do the secondary weapons on almost every single new operator seem to be miles, not even slightly, but miles better than the secondaries of the original operators? Why do we need an ACOG on one of the most powerful guns in the game? Why do you need to start putting sights on weapons? Why do we need a shotgun revolver coupled with this, the second highest DPS in the Keratos in the entire game of any secondary? Like, why are these things necessary? So when I look at that, I think that there are obviously some concerns. This happens with every game. Developers want to create new and quote unquote sexy content that gets people coming in. There are a lot of people who have already said, Cade is boring. He's just like a bandit. Why would I buy him? Those types of attitudes, in my opinion, are what partially drives power creep. So if you go back to meta abuse, I don't know what can be done about it. I strongly believe that putting bans in ranked is a pretty good way about doing it, but I've been a proponent of making the ranked rule set mirror Pro League for a billion reasons. And it was funny, actually, because I did watch that Fabian interview. The amount of people in the comments on YouTube who were like, pro players need to realize that ranked players are their bread and butter. You are aware that pro players, most of their balancing decisions will make you, a ranked player, enjoy this game more. It's not an us versus them kind of thing. The amount of people who have come in and been like, I played R6 TMs and I loved the rule set. I played in a custom game with Pro League rules. I loved it. Why don't we bring this to ranked? Your mileage is your mileage may vary, but ultimately at the end of the day, it'll cut down on meta abuse. And most importantly, it'll make your average daily experience with this game go through the roof. So stop looking at it as an us versus them, pro players versus casuals, and realize that you can, get into harmony with these two beliefs, and you as a general player will have a better time.
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario you're looking at when something is balanced for Pro League more so than casual is that you occasionally get these operators that, for an inexperienced player, are not as useful. I think Castle is always a great example. A lot of people struggle to do anything useful with Castle, and sometimes inexperienced players will even harm their own team by playing Castle in the wrong way. So, yes, there's always been this sort of attitude now for season upon season upon season that Castle needs to be changed. He's so useless, he's so weak, he doesn't win. But at the high level, at the competitive level, he is useful when used in the right occasion. And so really the worst case scenario we're looking at here is that you sometimes may end up with operators that you as a solo queue who's relatively new to the game, who's playing at a sort of an average level, won't get all that much use out of. And that to me is not a terrible thing. It's certainly better than having an operator that maybe for the majority of players works quite well, but then once you become really experienced and you're high plat or diamond, suddenly it's a nightmare because there's something about him that, if exploited in the right way, when used by a team that's working together, is just impossible to deal with. So yeah, I would fully echo what you're saying there, that if it's balanced for the highest level, it will trickle down and it will work for everyone else. So absolutely agree with that. In terms of the term meta abuse, I personally find it is maybe a little bit of an oxymoron. It is a contradiction within itself, because meta stands for most effective tactic available, and whether intentional or not, it is part of the game. So I think the point you made, Flank, there really sort of highlights that perfectly. It's asking players to balance the game by maybe abstaining or refraining from playing certain operators or certain combinations. And that's not something that anyone can realistically expect. So I fully agree it's frustrating to play against that combination, especially when we have these global ability operators. And I think the broken thing about them is the risk versus reward ratio. If you play Caveira, if you pull off an interrogation, it can very often be round deciding. If you get the interrogation off, that's it. The attackers fall like flies, you get a second interrogation, bang, that's it, round one. It is a very, very powerful tool, almost sort of in the direction of line, but it's also very risky and very difficult to make it work. So that's where you have an operator where risk and reward is balanced. And the problem we have with Lion, Finker, and Dokkaebi, certainly to a degree, is there is zero risk of using them. The only risk is maybe you have to be in a place where for 2 seconds you can look down at your iPad or whatever she's using, or look down at your wrist and type something in, and then it goes off. That's the only risk, is don't do this when an opponent is 2 seconds away from you. That's it. And that is really the issue. They're certainly no fun to play against. And I think sort of the problem we've seen, especially with Finker, is that she's also not rewarding to play. And that's why throughout this whole time we've had that, certainly initially until she was rebalanced recently, or in sort of the recent seasons, was that she had a high win rate. There were definite indicators that showed she was too powerful, but at the same time she had a very low play rate because no one just wanted that. There was no gratification in pushing that button, and now I've got a little bit more health and I can resist flashes better and do all of these weird things that are so confusing that I can't even recount them all. I can't count all of them right now because you have all of these interactions.
And this is rogue talking, right? If this guy cannot recite the stats of an operator, then it's gone too far. Okay, right, that needs to be your benchmark. I think it goes
for all of us. It's our job to know these kind of things and know and explain to the community how these work. And then she was just so complex. I mean, okay, smoke damage uses you more, but the heartbeat is more detectable from a longer range. There's so many different things that moment you're pressing that button, the only thing in your mind is, okay, I've got a bit more health. That's it. It's so... Yeah, there's no gratification in that at all. So, yeah. I think the problem is not with players making use of those in Ranked or in Pro League, but it's more of a core balancing and design of the operators, and hopefully over time we can see operators added that firstly don't have those issues, and the ones that do, we can see reworked to a point where they're enjoyable to play and they're not ultra frustrating to play against. Right, that balance, especially when the balance is frustrating to play against but not really enjoyable to play, that's really what you want to avoid most of all. That would be my thoughts.
I concur with that. I mean, I think, yeah, the issue is not so much with the community using those operators, because you've got to expect that people want to win and they're going to use whatever the meta operators are. Like you said, I think the problem is perhaps with some of the design concepts with the operators in the first place. And I think it's probably idealistic to expect people not to be choosing operators based on the fact that you or the community widely feels them to be overpowered. And what Interro said with regards to bringing the ban phase into like away from just being competitive and interact and whatnot, that's probably the most elegant solution to the problem, because then the community gets to choose which operators they feel are, as you would put it, meta abuse, and remove them themselves. The only thing where my opinion perhaps diverges a little bit from what Rogue just said is, you know, I do agree that it's better for the operators to be a little bit underpowered rather than overpowered, you know, when it comes to, say, lower players. And, you know, I perhaps include myself in that category. But the problem is, you know, Ubisoft are kind of incentivized to make operators as cool as possible because, you know, although most of us probably buy the season pass, a lot of people will pay to unlock operators on a season-by-season basis. And if they seem a bit underwhelming, then I'll skip this one. I'll just wait for the next one. And then it's like another season of, you know, two kind of like yawn fest new operators. So it's such a fine balance to have a set of operators that work like for crap players like me and great players, and you know, are interesting for everyone to want to go and play. So I do think it's tough, but I'm not sure it's that positive if a set of operators come into the game and are really boring for very casual players to use as well. But I recognize within that, you know, like the headache of balancing it across the board.
I mean, there's a financial bottom line to new content, right? And the other thing too is we're not just talking about new operators. We're talking about the existing play rates of old operators. There's a reason why Ashe and Jaeger get every skin, and it's because these are the most popular operators. They sell well, and I'd imagine that the amount of people probably buying Rainbow Six credits that don't necessarily have a suitable amount of renown is probably way higher than for other operators. There's a reason why Castle has like no skins, and it's because his pick rate is in the toilet, you know, and they have a vested interest to try and make operators as savory and as balanced as possible because they want people to buy the stuff for them. You know, if you turn around and you make a Castle Elite, how many do you think it's going to sell realistically? Probably next to none. Whereas you could probably make 7 Ashe Elite skins and they would sell better than almost every other Elite skin in the game. That's just the financial metrics that you look at. And that's why we want to see operators, you know, like Glaz and like Blitz that get, I think, overtuned. Ubisoft has also come out and said that they deliberately overtune operators because it's easier to pinpoint what they need to nerf. That's fine as long as it's done quickly. There's no excuse in my mind why Ela took 6 months to balance. There's no excuse in my mind for why it took 4 or 5 months to balance Lion. And there's really no excuse why it took 9 months to remove Lion from competitive play. Glaz still remains unchanged. Ying still remains unchanged. There's a lot of operators that you can look at a high level perspective and say, these need to be fixed. Why is it taking so long? Look at original, 600 HP shield Blackbeard. Why did it take so long for him to get balanced? A lot of people like to equate this game to a MOBA. I think it's an okay comparison. I don't think it's perfect, but champions in MOBA get nerfed in 2 weeks after release. You get the initial bump in sales. Okay, cool. Nerf them, put them into where they need to be. It doesn't exactly happen that way here in Rainbow Six. And I think the big issue is I'm totally cool with them coming out with overpowered, not broken, but at least overpowered / overtuned operators to try and get good data points on where they need to fix and then tuning that operator down. But in a month, 2 months, not half a year, not 9 months. That to me is an almost inexcusably long period of time from a competitive standpoint. And another thing that does them wrong that I think would be assisted by adding the Pro League rules to ranked is that the data points that they get from ranked are not reliable at a high level competitive experience. We know from playing ranked at plat and above that most people want to play 3-speed operators. They want to run around. There's not as much cohesion. You know, the game itself at a ranked level does not mirror competitive. And this was funny because once again, going back to that video that you folks did with Fabian, a lot of people saying, you know, oh, well, all these pro players say that, you know, pro play is not real, you know, or that ranked is not real Rainbow Six. They need to realize that pro play is only 0.001%. Well, that's garbage. Pro play is the purest, most competitive, and toughest form of competition, wherein you're seeing the best out of each operator. Yes, ranked is probably the most, it would probably be the second most. I guess casual is probably the most played game mode, but we're not going to balance around casual. And ultimately, the amount of people playing a game mode does not necessarily factor into balancing for me and shouldn't factor into balancing for the devs. At the end of the day, the way that this game is played at the top level should show off the strengths and weaknesses of each operator. And I liken this to Lion an awful lot. A lot of people who don't have a good grasp of the game will turn around and say, oh, well, Lion's not that strong because you can just stand still. Or, you know, my teammate will pop 2 Lions right at the start of the round. If you play Thermite and you put both of your exothermic charges on wooden barricades at the first 20 seconds of a round, does that make Thermite a bad operator? No, it doesn't. It means that you don't know how to use him effectively. And that's a user error and not an operator error. The same thing goes with Lion. Just because people don't know how to use certain operators at a lower level does not mean that an operator is underpowered. And those kinds of criticisms of operator balancing can't really be taken into feedback because they're being based on a poor data sample and unreliable information. So when I look at it, it's just like by putting in Pro League settings into ranked, you get a much purer look under parameters that are very similar to ranked as to how each operator performs. And I think that's more reliable data and it will help the dev team and also will ease off some of the arguments between the casual and pro side because there will be, you know, more or less rather of a disconnect between the way operators are played and the way the game is played.
Can you guys
yeah, we're having a few connection.
Yeah,
hello.
Hello.
Still got you guys all right? Can you still hear us, Interro?
Yeah, I can. You guys, your webcams keep like cutting out.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird connection.
Discord, isn't it?
I don't know if it's on my end or not, but I think
it's the casual player base that's DDoSing us, Interro.
I'm in DDoS for having opinions because I said
the casual player base is like, no, we can't balance our own Pro League. No.
How much did you hear though? I
heard you perfectly all the way until literally the end, until you were finished.
Okay.
I want to throw a conspiracy theory at you guys that gives me hope. And let me know if you can't hear me. Okay, but so Blitz just got an elite and Glaz just got an elite. We know for a fact that the devs are looking at reworking or rebalancing Glaz. We know that is coming. Is it possible that they put these elites out because they think that in maybe the near future these operators might have a much lower pick rate than they do currently because of some changes that are coming down the line to these operators?
I think that's a fair theory.
I hope
it's not a buff.
Is it me just wishful thinking?
No, well, it's not a buff war. Whatever they were. Could you imagine? Like, yeah, we went back to the drawing board and we've given Glaz like a few extra smokes. I hope that like sorts the problem out. No, so maybe you're onto something because for sure, like he's going to be a lot less viable than he is at the moment when they do whatever they've got in mind for him. So. This seems possible, but why would we applaud that? Because actually, that's quite Machiavellian. If that's how their business practice was, you know, to knowingly like put a bunch of skins in the game whilst an operator is still good or overpowered or however you would like to reference them, knowing that in a month's time they're going to be a dog shite or whatever.
If it means that Blitz gets nerfed, I don't care. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah, I think a good way to balance shields is just take care of their leaning. Number one, I don't think shields should be able to lean. I think that's a pretty self-explanatory. And I mean, I don't think that this is based off of the amount of times where people see that. There's a clip going around right now from Racevic, the YouTuber, that shows like the Blitz just spamming left and right. And it's like, I've seen tons of those clips actually shared. And I mean, those happen, I think, pretty infrequently, but it's the thought process and the design philosophy behind shields. I think that Clash is underwhelming for a lot of people. And I think that she has drawbacks right now, obviously. I think she has a lot more weaknesses than strengths. And I actually think that she's quite undertuned at the moment. But at the same time, I think that on attack, shields mimicking her and what her lack of, prowess is in terms of fragging potential ought to be replicated by those shields. You know, it's just something like, please explain to me why Blitz is able to run quickly, blind you, lean, and also hip fire, and also aimed ADS. Explain why he can do all of those things, whereas Monty can't do that and Clash can't do that. Just explain it to me. Do I think Blitz is currently broken? Not really. I think Blitz is in a pretty decent place competitively, but he's not fun to play against in any universe, in my opinion. And I think that right there needs to be addressed.
I think if you die to a Blitz, a lot of times you feel cheated. You feel like it wasn't, but at the same time you play Blitz, and then when you die as Blitz, you feel like you got cheated. You know what I mean? Like, Blitz is a tough operator to play. I don't think Blitz is overpowered. I just think that Blitz is a concept that doesn't work in a first-person shooter for the reasons you just explained. I agree with what you're saying with the leaning. You mentioned Clash the other day, and I was talking off the ledge on this a little bit, but to talk about Clash, I think honestly that Clash is underused right now. I think she has a ton of potential that isn't being explored as much as it possibly could be right now. But I was in a 1v1 where I got the diffuser down, Jackal, 8 health or something. Clash just comes into the room, zaps me a couple of times. I die. I had no chance whatsoever of killing her in that scenario. And then she enables gets the diffuser and wins the round. And I felt cheated there. I felt, should she really do damage? Because I'll be honest, my point in that was that, in my opinion, the fact that she does damage doesn't really add to her, except in that situation. In the beginning of a round, when you're stopping a rush, which I've done many times with Clash, I've stopped a 5-person rush by standing in a doorway with Clash and resisting. The fact that I'm doing damage to the enemies isn't nearly as powerful as the fact that I'm stunning them and then I'm blocking their path. So I don't feel like the damage really adds that much to her, except for in that situation. And in that situation, it's a little bit broken, in my opinion. A good point that Pingu actually made was that a Legion mine can do the same thing. And Legion can do that from death. So Legion could be dead. In that same situation, if I'd walked over a Legion mine, I would have died, and whoever was left alive would have gotten the diffuser. And that's a great point on his behalf. I was talked off the ledge a little bit there, but I like what you said there, that I think that the attacking operators with shields should learn something from the way that Clash has been balanced.
I'm not going to say this to put down your ability, but if you're in a 1v1 against a Clash in a post plant, that Clash should not be in a position to do damage to you by tasing you. And that's the way I see it. I don't know if I lost connection, by the way. It looks like
he's enjoying this point.
I can hear you perfectly.
Say, you two are fine. He is frozen in place right now.
No, he's listening keenly.
He does look like he has a very expressive look on his face. If you're in a post plant scenario in a 1v1 and it's you versus a Clash, you should not be putting yourself in a position where Clash can deal damage to you. In a post plant, your safest bet is to hold an angle far enough away, or even be concealed and wait for the audio cue for the Clash to start to disable. Because keep in mind, she puts her shield on her back. She's very vulnerable. And I mean, there's a ton of counters to Clash, but Clash also excels in 1v1s. That's part of her thing. If you make sure you manage your taser effectively, then of course she's going to win. She's a shield. Shields are great in 1v1 situations. If it's a post plant, then you need to try and address her strengths, which I don't even think her taser doing damage is a strength, in my opinion. But you need to address the benefits that she has and the advantages she has over you, and you need to try and prevent that. And I'm not trying to put you down, because that's not my intended argument here.
The other thing with Clash is, I suppose you can close the distance. You could go down that route, but I guess Flanked was saying he was already on kind of low health. But Flanked, what do you make of that point that you shouldn't have even, once you'd got that plant down, you should have just retreated?
It was bang bang. In my defense, it was bang bang. It was like it was a 2v1. two of us against a Clash. Okay. And the Clash made a good play. And what had happened was there was an open mirror that the defenders had set up. We had opened it. I plant right on the other side of this open mirror. The Clash killed my teammate who was covering me planting, and then zapped me actually through that open mirror. So literally I get up from planting and I'm trying to get away, and it's just zap, and then I'm dead. You know what I mean? So it was bang, bang, but no, point taken. Absolutely. Obviously, I mean, that is a good point. Obviously, I think that Clash is fine where she's at. She's got a lot of downsides. So
I think she's too weak at the moment, personally, which is good. I am very happy with her being too weak.
At the same time,
okay with that.
So a couple days ago,
Can I just try before we continue? Can I just try and solve this? I'm going to leave and come back. Let's see what that does.
While he's doing that, a couple of days ago, I stopped a 5-person rush on Villa by standing in the study door with Clash. And
well played.
Yeah, I mean, who else could do that? That's kind of my point with Clash.
Well, I mean, to be fair, if you're standing in the study door of Villa as a Clash and nobody counters you from 90 or from stairs or from outside with utility, then I think that probably speaks more to the attacking lineup. There's, but I mean,
here's what I'll say: I'll stop their rush. So I think their plan initially was to rush study and just rush into Aviator, and I stopped it. So
fair. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Clash is. I literally had a match yesterday on Border where it was a 1v4 against a Clash and 3 other operators. Can't remember who. It was like Echo, Doc, Bandit. Killed them all. And then with, I was playing as Thatcher. I didn't have any EMPs left. And there was like 8 seconds on the clock. And I had to either plant or kill the Clash. I lost. But that's a very rare instance where Clash is designed to excel in that circumstance. That is her bread and butter. That's why she is, as an operator, in positions like that. And if you saw the way that she got played in pro play, she was basically designed to wait until the execute happened. The most teams played Clash in a very specific way. Keep her safe until the final 30 seconds, and by then you've either bled enough utility out of the attackers that they don't have a way to address her. They're short on time. Her stun gets maximum value because it slows you to a crawl. And then she can just dive behind a wall and quick swap to her SMG or her pistol. And it was very droll actually watching it. It was very boring because it all played out the same, especially those couple matches that we saw of Clash when she was played so heavily on Clubhouse. That's just the way she works. That's the way that she excels. And of course, if you find her in that specific circumstance, then yeah, she's going to do well. But it's every other circumstance outside of that she has a lot of weaknesses. And yeah, she might necessitate you running a Zofia or a Capitao, etc. But that's balance. She is a niche operator who does very well in the final 30 seconds, similar to Echo, similar to a Mira with a C4 or a Pulse, similar to Smoke.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I hope that's one of the more frustrating aspects to being and establishing a little bit of a voice in this community is, something like that happens to me. I get on Twitter, I vent a little bit, and people think that I'm, trying to, legislate for change within Rainbow Six Siege. I'm just venting, and I love talking about the game I love. And I hope that people can. I love talking to you. You make a great counterpoint there. Pingu made a great counterpoint. There should be nothing wrong with me or anybody for that matter talking about the game that we love and talking about different ideas and then getting counterpoints. And that's what's good about this. That's what makes for a healthy community. And I hope.
And it's natural. It's perfectly natural. I guess it's the way in which you do it. If you sat on Twitter, bemoaning it and like begging for a nerf or, wouldn't listen to reason, then I think that's perhaps a different case in point. But to go and vent a little bit on Twitter, I don't think you can really, have any issue with someone doing that. That's perfectly natural, especially for someone that cares so much about the game, quite clearly. How are you getting on there, Rogue?
Yeah, it says my camera is in use by Discord.
You probably have to stop streaming.
What a nuisance.
Yeah, and then restart the stream.
You could
close.
You could try Control R. Apparently, that will restart your Discord. This
okay.
Someone in my chat has said. So that's just rebooting his Discord.
His camera's beautiful. It's a shame not to be able to see him.
Yeah, he's a wonderful.
Yeah, I did in between there. I did turn it off and then back on it again, completely Discord. So
I'm thinking it's OBS, Rogue, that you're gonna have to restart. before
does
your
do
camera will
that.
show up in
I'm going to switch to a different setting and see if that does anything. 1 second. And then maybe restart.
Yeah,
I think the big thing with Clash though is and it sucks that he's not getting this, but I'm assuming you guys are recording the VOD so that it will all be uploaded and shared.
Yeah, we'll have it.
The big thing with every operator is the same thing is look at Castle, for example. You don't have any utility and you have 20 seconds to go and there's a castle barricade in front of you. What happened? You lose.
Yeah.
That's the way the operator is designed, right? And that's more an error on the attacker's part to take care of the castle barricade in your path before the clock beats you. Because as attackers, you have two goals. Get the diffuser down before the time runs out or kill all of your opponents. You are working against the clock, whereas the defenders are working alongside of it. So if you can't take care of your opponents, or at least expose their weaknesses or break down their strategies in a suitable manner of time, you lose. And there are operators who are very good in those circumstances. Confronting a castle barricade or hitting, a super highway of legion mines on the way to the site, or triggering a Capkin trap and that kind of thing, or having to vault through a window and knowing that there's somebody watching you and there's a frost trap beneath it and you have to pick. Do I shoot the frost trap and die to the person watching, or do I try to shoot the person and then get the frost trap? What do I do? Those are things that are very impactful at the end of the round, and that's why they're designed to be that strong. So I think looking at that specific circumstance with a Clash is not necessarily indicative of her being too powerful, but just her excelling in the area in which she should be excelling.
And how likely is it to encounter that situation? That's another huge factor that has to go into that. Because a fused cluster charge could kill an entire team without you even entering the building. But how likely is that to happen? That's another huge aspect to the balance that has to be, I think discussed. Should we just talk a little bit about Pro League while Rogue's trying to get set up here? Because I want to see if there's anything that's jumped out to you, Interro, with the Pro League getting back on track. We've had a lot of matches here. What's jumped out to you so far with Pro League?
Number one, adding those 2 extra rounds has made the world of difference, not just in terms of competitiveness, but also in terms of excitement and thrills. And the big thing is that, I'm sure Pete and Rogue would agree with this. As Europeans, you're used to draws in a lot of your sports. North Americans, we don't really have draws in most of our sports. We hate them. We can't stand them. We want an exciting conclusion. We want a thrill. We want an outcome, man. We want to see a team win. And
we have teams play for draws. It's
exactly. So and as somebody who sees draws in this sense, I think that they're very fair. If after 10 rounds neither team is better, give them both points and shoo them along. That's the way it should work. As much as I would love to have 40 rounds to decide a victor, I realize that we have production costs. I realize that our casters have lives. And I realize that I don't particularly want to blow my throat out by the time that I'm 40 years old by killing my vocal cords. So, I'm okay with draws. They're not exciting. I get that. They're not sexy, which is a word that I used to describe operators earlier on. But Ubisoft took a lot of feedback from the pro players. And the pro players said that if we were given an extra possible rotation on defense and attack, and you extended the round count just by 2 rounds, you wouldn't need overtime because the game would be more balanced. It would provide for better back and forth. There'd be more control on both sides of the coin, on both attack and defense, and it would make for better overall play. And they were right. And this also kind of impacts the whole pro players versus, not, was that they knew what was best for the competition. Ubisoft listened, ESL listened, they enacted the requests of the players. And so far through 5-6 play days, we've had 1 draw. And it was a pretty damn exciting match in which the record for most kills in a single match got broken. Mm-hmm. So I think you can say that this has been a pretty big triumph and is working out really well. Outside of that, I think a lot of people are trying to be soothsayers here in regards to what teams are and aren't going to make it to LAN. After 2 play days, Noble was undefeated in North American Pro League, and then they basically came a hair away from getting relegated last season. 2 matches don't mean nothing. Wait, give it time. Once we hit play day number 5 of each region, then you can start to have a good understanding of where teams are. Even then, that might be a little too soon. Because Mouse finished dead last in North America through the first half of NA last season. And then they had the second best record for the second half and literally came one match away from making it to LAN. So there's always a lot more games to play. There's still 12 days left for most of these regions. Give it time. And I think it's way too early to start writing teams off.
You know, I thought it was really interesting after G2 played Team Secret the other day, and you interviewed Meepy after the match. Yes. And their strategy, which was very loose, if I remember rightly, but basically it was just a pin Kanto. And even if they've got a trade, Meepy was saying, you know, basically their strategy was just to find Kanto, eliminate Kanto, and then just play loosely and you know, work on taking out G2 after that. And it, you know, because obviously he's like literally one of the best players in Rainbow Six Siege. Do you think that is positioning him into places whereby it's making him vulnerable to getting pinned?
I think that team is exceptional. And by this, I'm referring to G2. I think that they are exceptional at fighting for trades and draws. You can see that it's a textbook play oftentimes to set up crossfires, especially in the post plant, which is where I really think G2 excels. Once G2 gets a diffuser down, they almost never lose. And I think that's because their coordination is so good and they know how to hold angles. And also you've got probably 5 of the best players in the whole world all on one team right now. I think one of the issues with Kanto and the way that he plays is that team leans very heavily on him to entry successfully. And we've seen multiple games where Kanto can basically drone himself in or get droned in once and basically just go on a rampage and kill people because he's able to pick apart unsuspecting defenders or unsuspecting attackers, depending on which side of the field he's playing on. The problem is that Secret did play quite unpredictably. They were consistently roaming in weird places. They weren't always feeding off of each other, but they were doing stuff that really kind of confounds you. You know, we call it brainless plays or ranked plays is basically the way that we talk about it. And in a single map series, that kind of stuff, it works. It really, really works. You can basically just do remarkably dumb things and walk away with a huge victory. You know, look at the way that Fnatic played against EG and Rio. They literally pulled their brains out of their skulls and they just ran around with shotguns and did things that really, really puzzle you. And you have to drone them out 18 times to try and figure out where they are. They take fights that nobody should be taking. They push angles that you would think usually the attackers or defenders have multiple crossfires established on, but they don't. And that kind of thing works. But once you read into it and you approach it on a possible second map, if it's a best of 3 series, or, you know, if you play another match against them later on, you just become more cautious. It's very hard to make that course correction mid-match, especially when egos and emotions are brought into this. G2 really doesn't tilt a lot of times, but they are a very emotional team. They are used to winning. I think that there's a lot of pride in what they do. And I think that sometimes they can get quite heated, especially online where they don't have the ability to cool themselves off like they do on LAN. And when you're, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 rounds in and you've got Leon Gids, who really looked like, you know, he took his vitamins and said his prayers that morning and was just running amok over the entire map, it's very hard to predict that. And I think they let the game slip away from them a little bit and they just weren't able to get it back. Big credit to Secret for the way they played it. They played it masterfully. But at the same time, I do think a lot of it was G2 just not supporting their entries. A lot of times Kanto would get picked off early or Jonas would get picked off early and there'd be nobody nearby to fight for a trade. And that's a significant problem when you're playing against as unpredictable a style. And honestly, it's very hard to set up a trade with an unpredictable style like that. If anybody wants to see that kind of gameplay in action, go back and watch the USN broadcast of Strength versus Obey, where Strength was doing some of the silliest things I've ever seen in a game, and they were getting away with it because you don't really know how to prepare for it. And it's very tough to be able to make the changes necessary to take care of it in the middle of a match.
The thing that jumped out to me with that match was that G2 lost 3 rounds on the fence. That was the first, like, I was like, whoa, okay. I did not expect that because I've always associated Villa being a very defender sided. I think you mentioned it during the broadcast that, you know, in typical Villa is very defender sided. And what jumped out to me was Kanto and Eunice on the roam wasn't as effective as maybe it normally is. A lot of times you don't see teams penetrate that first wall of defense that G2 has in the Kanto and Eunice roam. And I felt like Secret was able to get past that and then execute, or maybe not even execute's the right word, but they were able to negotiate that first wall of defense of the Kanto Eunice roam pretty well. And when they won 3 rounds on attack on Villa, I was like, okay, this could be a match. That was really what jumped out to me. We moved on to Pro League, just talking about what we've thought so far.
Yep, fair enough.
I mean, as far as beyond that, anything that else as far as the NA matches or anything that's jumped out to you?
Number one, I'm very glad that I don't have to cast Coastline today. That's definitely something. I will tell you this much, that as a caster, there's nothing wrong with casting the same match repeatedly, but getting the same match 3 times in a row does kind of throw with your brain. Especially if the matches don't end up being particularly exciting. There are times where, you'll see Border 3 times in a row or Oregon 3 times in a row, and every single round goes down to the final minute, ends up being like 4 hours of just the same Oregon stuff over and over and over again. It can get quite challenging to cast that. But overall, Coastline's an interesting map because there's experimentation that can happen on Coastline. It's got 4 viable sites. Some of them are more defender sided than not. The attackers typically win, and because the attackers typically win on Coastline, there's, I think, very interesting things that the defenders can do to try and stop that. I think the matches yesterday were really exciting. I think Reciprocity do really, really well when they frag. Losing a support player like Goddess, I think was very controversial, but picking up somebody like Skies, who has always been a player that I think could easily take the title of one of the best players in his entire region. I think for a while he probably had that. But the problem is that the way that I've seen Skies play, and I was very critical of this in the run up to the Paris Majors, or the Paris Major qualifiers, was that he doesn't always play well with the team. If they can keep him on a tight leash and have him play with that team, as we saw him do towards the end of the season on Obey when he was fulfilling the Buck role, which he'd taken over from Maman, I think he was doing exceptionally well. And the rest of that team probably wouldn't have gotten relegated if they had been playing like that from the start. EG looked good. Rogue looked really good. I was very disappointed in Rogue's performance yesterday, to be completely honest. I think that there were a lot of mistakes by both Dark Zero and Rogue. Dark Zero repeated a lot of errors where they would stick one of their players, primarily Jarvis, upstairs and have very minimal support. They'd give him an ACOG, they'd throw him inside a theater. He would sit completely unsupported. He wouldn't hold much map control, and not a lot of time would be wasted trying to take him out. Yet Rogue still struggled a couple times to be able to get into Penthouse and pressure him in theater. So those are things that obviously they'll fix. I think Super's a great player. I think that his calls and his ability to help that team from a supporting role is probably somewhat missed, but I think they can make up for the fragging potential with Vertical, who's probably one of the best fraggers in North America at the moment. And honestly, I love Super to death. I think he's an awesome dude, but if you've got an opportunity to pick up somebody like Vertical, you don't skip out on that opportunity, right? Unless you think your team is perfect, then you don't bypass that option. As for the rest of the other teams, I was actually really impressed with the Rise Nation Orgless game. I thought that one was going to be really tight. It didn't end up being anywhere near as tight as I thought it was going to be. And I don't know what's going on with Rise Nation, but they really need to figure things out. And if I'm being brutally honest, XG, you probably got to make a roster change again at this point. I think they looked better, but I still think from what I've seen of them through 2 play days, I think that they have a ways to go to be able to catch up to some of the teams, even in the middle of the pack in North America. And I was actually very surprised that they didn't make a roster change after Challenger League, because usually the way it works for most teams, Europe seems to be the one region where this doesn't happen. But in Latin America and NA, typically what you'll do is if you make Challenger League playoffs, you drop somebody and you pick up a true bona fide Pro League caliber player to bolster your chances of winning. And then if you do win the Challenger League playoffs and you end up making it into Pro League, you make a second roster change and pick up yet another Challenger League player or a Pro League level player, and you end up with 2 better players on the squad. That's typically the way we've seen teams do it. Cloud9 did it. They picked up Retro and then they picked up Laxing. So I was kind of surprised that we didn't see that from XG. And I would imagine that there will probably be another roster change for XG if they lose tonight, and if they lose their next matchup and they start the season 0-4, I would imagine that we'll probably see another person get dropped off that roster.
I mean, it is brutal, but that's I guess just the nature of the business, right? Like, if you want to progress, that's what you need to do.
There's no, I mean, where does loyalty get you? Relegated. That's it, right? It doesn't get you into Pro League. It doesn't get you into LAN. And I hate to say it, but as you mentioned it's a business at the end of the day. Laxing handled it, I think, with extreme grace and class. When Cloud9 originally dropped him before picking him back up, he basically just said, I don't wish any ill will or animosity to my teammates. It's a business. You want to win, you do what's best for your team. You might not agree with it on a personal level, but you can respect it on a professional one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead, Pete. I was just agreeing with that point.
What did you make of when Dark Zero and Rise played on Oregon? I can't remember if you cast it because I've been watching so many of the VODs on YouTube. I've just been going through all the VODs. But what did you make of Mint on Blitz on Oregon? Do you remember that?
Yeah, so one thing that got overlooked actually in that matchup was that Dark Zero banned Oregon. It was one of their 2 perma bans last season. We haven't seen Dark Zero play Oregon in almost 2 years. So saying that Oregon is stale and stuff like that is very true. Oregon does tend to be quite played out, but Dark Zero took a lot of weird gambles. They went to tower twice. They probably didn't need to. They tried. It was a valiant effort. It fell short. But at the end of the day, seeing a team pull out a map that they haven't played on ever, similar to the way that EG pulled out Villa against SK or Dark Zero back when they were SK, was equally impressive. Mint has always been probably one of the better shield players in Pro League, especially on Blitz. The team doesn't always run it, which I think is good. It's definitely not a crutch. And I think Mint is capable of carrying a match while IGLing, which is really impressive.
Dude, it scared me just watching it.
Yes. And I mean, you have to build a strategy around a Blitz, though. That's the thing. And it's the same with Montaigne. And I think one of the biggest issues with Penta is that, from my observation, they keep trying to force Hungry on Montaigne. And I don't think it works because they don't support the Montaigne. They don't build a strategy around the Montaigne. They don't seem to have a clear strategy around what to do once they take map control and then transition towards getting a plant down. Now, maybe they do and they just get outplayed or they fall short. But my observation is that it doesn't work. Whereas Dark Zero plays around the Blitz very effectively. They set their players up to give him cover, or they give him a position where he can go in on his own as a Blitz and wreak havoc and possibly walk away with a kill or 2, or at least distract them long enough to get whatever objective may be. Maybe it's map control, maybe it's more drone work, maybe it's pinching roamers, etc. from the rest of the team done successfully. And you have to be very conscious of that.
There was this one on attacking Laundry, and he come down the stairs and then he charged the mirror window and just started flashing people. I was like, that's a ballsy move, man. Like, he wasn't trying to shield the diffuser plant. He was like, no, I'm straight towards that wall and I'm just going to start flashing people and I'll get the diffuser down. As a viewer, it's really interesting just to see these different things,
Yeah, I feel like Rise was a little slow to adjust to it personally.
Maybe I was
confused. They were bringing a Capkin against it, and I thought that it would have been more appropriate to see a Legion personally. But with that said, I believe that Dark Zero was running a Thatcher, thinking that there would be a Capkin, and they were kind of using the Thatcher to clear the way for the Blitz, and then they would smoke, and then that smoke would basically cover the distance between the Blitz and whoever he was trying to get to. It was scary to see. It really
weren't hanging about, were they?
No, it was intense.
They literally used Blitz's namesake, right? That's the whole point. But
yeah,
I think the way that Mint plays him is very specific. There are very few people, I think that Secret being as unpredictable as they were really kind of limited the Blitz play that we could have seen out of Pengu. I think Pengu got caught a number of times in positions that he probably shouldn't have. I think he got killed by a C4, twice, if I remember correctly, from below, which were very shrewd plays from Secret and extremely well calculated. But I think the bigger problem was that there was no adjustment to Mint's Blitz. And that was the big thing, is that there are tools at your disposal, maybe Capkin, maybe Legion, etc. But there's definitely ways there. But that also falls on Dark Zero using him effectively to try and bypass any counters that present themselves.
How you doing there, Rogue?
I'm perfectly fine, and I'm a bit conscious of the time because Parker, you need to basically.
I have an hour. I have to. So I showered ahead of time.
Right.
Basically, all I need to do is I need to pack up this computer, and then I need to change, and that's about it. And I need to eat at some point. But I mean, I don't have to leave for like an hour, give or take.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, did you talk about Chaos at all? Because I find it quite interesting to see them do well, and especially beating Secrets. That, I think, is quite an achievement for them to do this early on in the season. And it's quite interesting to see, certainly in EU at this stage, to have Chaos and Empire as the two unbeaten teams so far.
I think Chaos really benefited from a really awful day from Mocket, if I'm being completely honest. That was interviewing secretly after that match was very difficult because a lot of it didn't really fall in the way that Chaos played. It fell in the way that Mocket played. Mocket played horrendously. That was one of the worst performances I've ever seen out of that team, in my opinion. They were all over the place. They were really sloppy. And I know that there are probably going to be Mocket fans and even maybe players from Mocket who watch this that will be unhappy with such harsh words. But in all reality, that team is miles better than that performance. They need to figure it out if they want to do well at the Invitational, which they're qualified for. Because I'm going to be honest, if that team showed up to the Invitational quals playing like that, there's no way they'd make it. So when you look at that matchup in particular, the game against Secret was really good. This is the problem with being only 2 weeks in. Meepy said that a big part of why Chaos won was because Secret played really lax and really restrained. One of the things that Secret has always done really well is unleash Leon and let him just do brainless stuff. And he gets away with it a lot of times. But there have been matches in the past where he overextends and he ends up getting burned way too many times, and they lose too many rounds to come back from that. And I mean, some of that falls on the rest of the team. It's not all Leon. There are a number of people in that team who make mistakes and don't ultimately end up helping him out or helping out the team. But if that's true, if you had Secret playing a really slow plotting style that didn't work out all that well, and then you have Mocket basically imploding after the third round, it's you can look at Chaos and be like, wow, they played really well. Chaos played better than I think any match they played last season. I have to give them absolute credit for that. I've always been very skeptical of Chaos because they've always shown a lot of potential, but they've never really been able to realize it. I don't know how much the roster change is going to affect them. I don't know how much taking Snookin off of that roster is going to do. Vitalin looked like a very good addition to the team, and they played much more effectively as a team. The one thing that I noted was they made rotations very well, and they always tended to have somebody there to catch them, which is the mark of really good coordination. How much of that is map-based as well is another question that needs to be answered, because you can look like the most well-oiled machine possible on 2 maps, but there's 5 more maps you got to play. And that doesn't necessarily work in a best of 3. And it also doesn't work if you get counter-stratted or you end up playing one of your best maps against a team that is just playing better on that map. So this is why I always caution people to walk in. I don't mean this to you guys. I just mean in general. Caution people when they look at 2 play days and they think, wow, this is incredible. I think Chaos looks better than they've looked at any point previously, and this is a very good start for them. And I definitely think that they've silenced a lot of critics. They probably have a top 4 ceiling right now, but I think the big question mark is going to be, does Empire sustain their play? Does Lestream finally realize their potential? Is Mocket going to continue to have as bad of a season as they've had so far? Is Penta going to continue to have a bad season? Those are the real questions for me against Chaos, more so than is Chaos going to be able to pull themselves up the ladder, because they're definitely going to benefit from some teams having a bit of a slow start.
Well, your point with 2 weeks in is taken, and I think that's a great point. The Dark Zero versus Rogue match, is there a clearer measuring stick match that you could possibly have? Literally, Dark Zero's season ended on the same map against the same team with a roster change in vertical. I would say that Rogue's stronger now than they were last season. Personally, again, I echo what you say about Super, but I think that Vertical's a stronger player. And yet we see Dark Zero go and actually win that match against Rogue, the same map, the same team that knocked them out of last season and eliminated their chance of going to LAN. So yes, 2 weeks in, but I'm really impressed with Dark Zero so far.
I think that DZ has everything at their disposal to be a top 2 team in North America. The only thing that I think would hold them back is a roster. And right now, I think the roster is clicking. That's it. If that team starts to fall short, I would imagine that with all the things at their disposal, they'll probably stick with that core for a while, which I think is the right call. All too often we see teams start to fall apart, and a roster that has a lot of potential makes a change, which might not always necessarily be the case. Now, this is, in stark contrast to when you look at certain teams and you look at that team and you think to yourself, wow, they really should make a roster change without even seeing them play, just based on past performance. I think DZ have everything at their disposal to play well. They've got a team house. They've got good funding. They've got 2 coaches. They've got personal training. They've got so much going for them. But just because you have everything there doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use it effectively and use it efficiently. So far, I've liked what I've seen from Dark Zero. I think that they've looked good, but also keep in mind, SK Gaming, when they were SK last season, they came out of the gate firing on all cylinders. They held a playoff spot until the last week of Pro League, from like the 3rd or 4th week onwards. They had a slow start for their first 2 games, or their first game, if I remember correctly. They ended up taking either first or don't quote me on this, but they ended up taking first or second in like week 4, I think, week 3, week 4, week 5, something along that. And they didn't ever drop out of the playoff race until the very final day, which, as you said, was against Rogue on the same map. So I think it's really hard to say that DZ looks that much better. I think they look better, but I do agree with Milos yesterday. The competition in NA has stepped up their game over the last 4 months. Space Station probably have the best roster they've ever had. I think you could probably say the same about Rogue. I think EG also are continuously improving. Rise Nation, I think, based on 2 matches, look like they've taken a step back, but they're trying to fit Ghost into that roster, and I think they'll be able to bounce back. And Reciprocity looks really good too, all things considered. So the race for NA is going to be about mistakes. That's really what it's going to come down to. And that's why if I'm Mocket or if I'm Penta, I'm really worried, because in EU, both of these teams lost their first 2 matches, of which on paper they probably should have walked away with some points on, but they didn't. And as we saw from every single region last season, losing 2 games at the start of the season could be it. That's it. You're done.
It's a great point. Great perspective. I love this, man. This is good stuff.
I had a blast.
Yeah, for anybody who in the chat who doesn't follow Pro League as closely and may not be familiar, you can watch the VODs of every Pro League match on YouTube, the Rainbow Six Esports channel, and then they're streamed live on Twitch and on YouTube. So if you're not familiar with what we're talking about here, you should be, because you're missing out. If you love Rainbow Six Siege, if you love playing it, you're missing out.
I'd recommend, anyone go and watch, like anyone interested in Siege to go and watch it, because to me, it's like just as interesting as watching a football match. But on top of that, it's like there may be however many million people playing Siege, but it's still a small community. It's like our thing, it's our thing that we can all enjoy together. And you learn so much watching those Pro League matches. It's unbelievable. I mean, I've started a whole bloody series like documenting some of the stuff that I saw in there to share. But like, I just feel that for someone just getting into Siege, going and watching Pro League is like an amazing advantage to them for their like learning curve.
Plus, it's really entertaining.
It is really. The casters aren't too bad, are they? They're all right. There's 1 or 2.
I hear Kickstar's quite good.
Yeah, it is. I like casting with them.
I don't know if we've got time, but I really like. Maybe we'll have you on again, because I wanted to ask you about what life is like as a caster and your career choice to do it, and like some of that stuff. But I mean,
I have time if you have time. It's up to you how long you want the VOD to be. I'm not going to be offended if you guys are more conscious of time.
Not at all. Certainly not from my end. No, because I almost feel like we've missed out a little bit there. And I was thinking, there was these kind of things that I still wanted to discuss. No, yeah. So Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to how did you get into casting, and what's life like as a caster? Because it seems to me from the outside that there's a lot of sacrifice, actually. Just the fact that you have to come to Europe, like live in Europe, and I guess you might have your family's back in Canada. What's life like as a caster, just day to day as well, as much as anything?
I mean, I like Poland an awful lot. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I'd only ever lived on one continent. I'd only ever lived in one country. I'd lived on both ends of Canada, on both the west and the east coast. It was not really a decision that I had a lot of time to make. I was approached on Monday evening, Tuesday morning, and by Saturday evening, I was on a flight to Europe. So it was something that I basically had to decide on immediately. And I was very lucky, actually, to be in a place in my life where I could make that decision. It lined up quite well. And it was really interesting. Poland is not a country that a lot of people in the West think of as, being a place to live or settle down. It's there's a huge language barrier. Polish is one of the hardest languages to learn. It shares very little commonalities with English. And especially where I live in Katowice, it's in a region, a voivodeship or a province or a state of, I think, like 2 to 3 million people. It's a bustling place, lots of cities, about 200 to 300,000, but it's certainly not Krakow and it's certainly not Warsaw. And your experience with people who speak English is very limited. And because it's not a major city like Krakow or Warsaw, most things also close around here at 9, 10, 11 p.m. Very few things outside of fast food restaurants are open past 10 o'clock, outside of like gas stations as well. And when we are primarily nocturnal, given that our broadcasting schedule is always in the evening, it can make it kind of isolating and a little lonely, and also very difficult to go about and have a normal social life. That is in my mind the largest drawback to this job, is that I am very often awake at night with very little things to do, often at the mercy of the schedules of stores and my own sleeping schedule, and that is by far and away the toughest part. But outside of that, everything else is great. It's walkable. It's been nice to get to explore Europe. You know, I've got to see, I've had the chance to see a number of European countries. I want to try to do more travel. Obviously, that's difficult over the next 2 months, given the fact that we have Super Month and then the Invitational. But it's been an experience that I came into not really having many expectations. And I'm not really an expectations kind of guy, because I think that, you know, the whole idea of expectations always disappoints you. So I came over here expecting a pretty fun experience, but one that I assumed I would struggle in. And I've been really pleasantly surprised with pretty much everything along the way. I have an awesome job. I have a great experience, being able to cast matches and be a part of this community. As you noted, it's still very small. It feels like a family, given the fact that there are, millions of people who play this game actively. And it's allowed me to do cool stuff like this and meet people and, get recognized in public, which blows my mind. I was at brunch in Toronto the other day, and then I was streaming a day later. Somebody comes in and they're like, yo, I saw you out at brunch 2 days ago. And I was like, what restaurant was it? And they named the restaurant. And I was like, damn, that's wild. So those are the kind of things where it's like, it still shocks me. I told Rogue that I still have a bit of imposter syndrome. I think I'm just a normal guy that gets to be lucky and sit at a desk and talk about video games. It's been in a weird transition being kind of a public figure, but I like to think I'm handling it decently well. And I hope that the game continues to grow and opportunities for not just myself, but also other people to get involved keeps increasing.
You were awarded Caster of the Year by CGG. So congratulations on that. Yeah. I think that everybody would agree that you're handling the spotlight and your role within this community very well. And not only that you're handling it well, that you've embraced it. And my favorite part about you, Interro, is you're very accessible. And I think that's important. And I recognize that it's tough. The bigger I get, I recognize, how much people can pull at you and stuff. But I recognize I see how accessible you are to the general public and people who want to reach out to you. I think that they can relate with you. And I think that is very important. And I commend you for that.
I appreciate that. One of the things I noticed, and I mean, I get uncomfortable with lots of kind words, so I apologize if I don't react as well as I should. But I try to be accessible, because one of the things that I noticed when I was coming into Rainbow Six prior to being a caster was that the community was very fragmented. It still is, but the one thing that I do like is that we see streamers and pro players talking and interacting more on Twitter than they did a year and a half ago. You see the casual viewer base interacting more with pro players. And when I first started playing Rainbow Six and I started following people on Twitter and starting to get involved in the scene, I found that a lot of people were in their silos, and pro players only really interacted with themselves. Content creators interacted with themselves. The general public had no real means to talk to people, as you mentioned, in an accessible way. And it's not just me. I think that as this community has grown, players, casters, talent, content creators, influencers, everybody has gotten more accessible. You have a podcast right now where you literally try to unite two wings of this community under one roof, and you have an entire Q&A session. You actively listen to feedback. There's never been a time in Rainbow Six's history, in my opinion, where just the average viewer, the average fan of this game, has an opportunity as strong as they do now to talk to their favorite player, caster, creator, influencer, etc. And I think that it's something that's great for the scene. It's something that I've tried to keep in mind. My DMs are open on every platform, which might be a terrible idea in the long run. But at very minimum, I try to at least read, if not respond to as much as I can. Obviously, some days it's tougher than others.
Except for mine.
Well, I had a bad run. you DM'd me at a time when I was getting a lot of DMs, and I read yours and I forgot to respond to it. So I apologize. But I did get back to
it. That's a long story.
But the way that I see it is it's that accessibility is a great way of bringing people in. There is a very confrontational and hostile tone between both the casual and the pro side of these communities. The pros talk down to casuals and don't see that, maybe being nice to them helps. And the casual side doesn't want to concede any ground on the balancing of this game. And I'm just as guilty of it as others. Very difficult for you to, I think, be able to temper your words and be able to deal with people, especially when a lot of them don't say things in a nice manner and are very outwardly hostile towards you instead of looking to try and come together. But I think it's really important for everybody, not just players, but content creators, etc., to try and take a vested interest in the pro scene in this game. The pro scene is neglected in this game, I think, in comparison to a lot of others. The content creation side is doing really well. You go on YouTube, look at how many Siege YouTubers have over 1 million subs. Look at how many of them have over 200, 300, 400,000 on YouTube. Rainbow Six videos get incredible traction online. But I think where we stumble is bringing them over to Twitch in terms of live interaction and then in terms of viewing experience for the Pro League as well. And you've got to give a lot of praise, not just to you three, but also a lot of other content creators for trying to mend fences between those communities. Because when you look at some of these YouTubers who have 1 million people subscribed to them, they don't even know what a go for is. And that, I think, is a good starting place. So accessibility is going to bring people in. And it's not me really who deserves the praise for being accessible. It's you three, and it's everybody else who's doing stuff on the side to try and bring their fans over to what I think is a pretty awesome aspect of Rainbow Six, which is the esports scene.
Yeah. You are a credit to this community, though. You're such an easygoing guy, and you're so free with your opinions, and you articulate yourself very well. So I do feel like we're lucky to have you.
I appreciate that.
No, I really do mean it. I was really excited, like when Rogue says, I've got Interro coming on. I was like, dude, I've got so many questions written on my phone. But anyway, also I want to give I want to say Flanked here has done so much for that as well, because for the longest time he's been doing these the pro and the potato, and it's really been, knowing him behind the scenes, it's really been a passion of his to, to bring that the aspect and the point of view of the pro player to the average gamer, of which I include myself in. And I think in that sense, Flanked has been a real credit to the community and trying to bridge that gap. And
let me stop you there, Pete, because all the credit for that series needs to go to the pros for taking the.
Yeah, of course.
The first episode was with Laxing. Whenever I reached out to him, I had 30,000 subscribers, had never done anything like that before, and he was willing to do it. I think the second episode was with Fabian. He was willing to do it. That is a credit to those guys, not me, because most pros in any other esport would never have given me the time of day. Never.
Yeah.
Give yourself some credit, man. Anyway.
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
And Rogue's done a great spreadsheet, by the way.
I do number stuff.
Spread the love.
One of and I will always thank Get Flanked for this, and I think I reached out to him, was that I was a literal nobody. I mean, I still feel like I am. This goes in with the imposter syndrome that I mentioned earlier. But I was a literal nobody. I think I'd maybe casted a month, 2 months of Pro League up till this point, and Get Flanked messages me, and I'd watched the Pro and Potato many times. I'd seen the content shared. I know how highly regarded it was, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm getting a request from Get Flanked to appear on his channel to discuss things with him. And I was absolutely blown away. And it was extraordinarily gracious. And I really thank him for not just opening my eyes to the idea of collaborating with content creators, but also allowing me to come in and lend my words to a couple interesting topics revolving around the North American scene, and also to introduce me to his viewership and hopefully introduce his viewership to a new perspective from a casting side of things. And I thought that was really, you didn't need to do it, but you did it. And I thought that was really kind of you. So.
Cool, Ross
that's enough of this, guys.
Cool Ross is saying
bragging about each other. Let's I know that the viewers probably have a ton of questions, Rogue. I don't know what else you have on your agenda, but my chat is chomping at the bit.
Yeah. Let's have some viewer questions. Shoot.
Yep.
I've got one ready. Is that okay?
Yeah, go straight ahead.
Because it is kind of for Interro. LGDL.yhard. No, LGDL. Do you think it's hard to watch the Pro League with the camera swapping? I almost want to control the camera. Like, so we kind of talked about this on this podcast before, and I don't know if you've caught any of those episodes, but for the casual spectator, or just for people in generally, it's the flicking of the camera can be a little bit distracting, but particularly like sometimes a story begins between two players. You know, there's one guy rounding a wall and there's one guy holding an angle, and then sometimes the camera switches off. Is there any sort of solutions that you can think of, or any way that what Ubisoft could do to improve it? And I don't intend any criticism there towards the person operating the spectator view, because I'm sure it's like it's a tough job, and there's probably a lot going on that I don't understand as well with regards to checking what utility there is and all that sort of stuff.
Right. I've been very critical of the spectator system and the viewership experience for probably the last couple months, and it's the hill that I want to die on right now. If I'm going to die on a hill for this game, it's going to be vastly improving the way that the game is watched, digest, and understood. And when you look at Rainbow Six, there's a lot of information that happens in the game that is vital for not just casters, but coaches and players and viewers, that is withheld. And that level of gatekeeping that's by, almost by nature and design of the game is extremely frustrating. Rainbow Six is always going to be tough to spectate. And I'll try to be quick through these questions as best as I can, because I know that there's going to be a fair bit of questions. I know you're conscious of time. Rainbow Six as a game, due to the fact that it's largely close quarters combat, is going to be a hellish nightmare to spectate for most people, because you have to basically make a trade-off. Do I go top down to give people a better understanding of what's happening while losing the more cinematic and competitive aspect of a first-person perspective? Or do I go first person to try and appeal to people who want to see the shooty pew pew while also losing out on the greater understanding of what's happening? Now, there is a split amongst viewers as to what to do best. Marciu, our spectator, is hindered by a single spectator cam. A lot of people don't know this. There is one single spectator. That's it. Kix, nor myself, Milos, nor Emzo get to control additional cameras. We see what's on the screen. That's it. Marciu sees what's on the screen. That's it. There's no option for a second slot unless we're playing on LAN. And even then, on LAN, you need two spectators to run that. And you're still going to have to flick through people. Yeah. The reason why it's disorienting, and derouting is a very good word for it, is because you're flicking from, Smoke to Dokkaebi to Hibana to Ashe to Zofia really quickly. And you as a viewer going, what the hell is going on? A big part of why that's happening is because we don't have the information about utility usage and their utility economy. If it's 30 seconds to go and I want to know how many toxic canisters does Smoke have left, what's going on with Echo? Does he still have both of his yokai drones in play? What's going on with Glaz? Does he still have both of his smoke grenades in play? What's going on with Hibana? Has she opened up every hole she can with her XKros? The only way for me to determine that information, outside of simply listening and keeping a mental note, which can be tough because a toxic canister from Smoke sounds the same as a gas grenade thrown from the attackers, the only way other than trying to keep a mental note of that is to literally flick from each of those individual players, see it on the screen, and then keep a mental running tally of that. If that information in a CSGO style UI overlay was available for us, that showed 5 players on either side at the bottom third of your screen with their utilities available, whether they're running claymores, whether they're running breaching charges, stuns, whether they're running impacts, barbed wire shields, and their health, as well as their remaining gadgets, not only would the viewing experience dramatically improve, but the understanding of the game from every single person's perspective would be incredibly better formed. And I think, and well informed. And I think that is the hill that I want to die on. I understand that you don't want to completely ape CSGO's system, but I don't really care. At this point, I think that information absolutely needs to be available because it will help everybody have a better understanding. It'll make our casting better. It'll make it easier for players to understand. And it'll make the viewers actually know what is going on and not just rely on what we're saying.
I think at the very least, something else you would probably find useful. Normally the casting desks have 2 screens, right? What I was really baffled by and surprised by.
We have three screens in the desk.
Okay.
We the middle screen is what's being showed on the stream, and the screens in front of us are just the game footage. So we each have a screen in front of us, and when we're not in game, that's just the lobby that's waiting for players. That's how we can look down and we can see, if they're waiting for players to connect, etc.
Okay. Yeah. So I was really surprised when we did that sort of trial casting at the Invitationals last year, essentially, that you don't have a second feed that shows you a top-down of what's going on as a caster. Because, like you said, you have exactly the same view of what's happening. You have basically the clean feed that you're talking over that then gets sent out, and you have to do all of these things from memory, all of the different battles going on over the entire map, all of the utility. You just have to, either flick through and then just memorize all this stuff and try and tell a story based on that, sometimes without knowing what's happening in all of these other places. So I think just to make your life easier and to make it easier for you to keep up with everything, having that top-down view would be really useful.
We do have it on LAN. We didn't have it for Rio. It's the only LAN I've worked that we don't have it. Rio was unfortunately a single camera setup. We didn't have a second top-down. But usually at the Invitational, we did actually have it. Usually the way it worked was the monitor in front of me is what's being shown is the game footage. The middle monitor would be the stream footage, and the monitor in front of Kix would be the persistent top-down camera. And I always talk about this. There was one moment in particular, and I can't remember what game it was, but if I recall, it was either on border or bank, and it was Rogue playing, and Eclipse was coming in on a flank. And the only reason we knew this was because I could glance over at the monitor and have that persistent top-down for a second spectator slot. And I see that Eclipse is going for this huge late flank, and there's nothing to stop him. There's nobody flank watching, and there's no Claymore. And I called it out loud. Eclipse is going for a flank. Marciu hears this because he's wired in. He can hear. He's got headphones. He swaps to Eclipse, and the moment he swaps to Eclipse picks up a double kill. That information never relayed if we didn't have that second top-down view. And that thing alone would also assist Marciu on his own, because he wouldn't need to flick around to try and figure out where people are, because he'd just look over at the monitor and he'd see, okay, it's going to be a B take. Got it. I know where everybody is. I don't need to manually flip between all the players to try and figure out where he is. I wish we had it. I really, really want multiple spectator slots. It would also help for rebroadcasts. We wouldn't need to share clean feeds. You wouldn't need these amateur leagues, which are suffering because they have to Discord screen share and try to cast off of that, which is a dreadful experience. It would help the lower scene as well by providing an opportunity to have multiple people in a game and improve that product, which would hopefully drive greater viewership for them as well and increase the interest in the game.
So just to be really clear, basically, if the guy spectating, was it Marciu?
Marciu spectates for us. Latin America has their own guy.
So he's just hitting shoulder buttons, and he has to go through all the operators to get to the one he wants.
He does it with a keyboard. He does it with a keyboard.
Okay.
Yeah, so they correspond to the number keys. So 0 would be the 10th player, 5 would be the 5th player, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers the question.
I was unrightfully banned. Had a good question here that I thought was interesting for you, Interro. If you weren't in working for ESL, what would be your dream job?
Dream job? I have no idea. It's funny enough that I had radio. I wanted to go to Ryerson for radio and television broadcasting, which is a university in downtown Toronto that is renowned for its media programs, and it actually has a much more robust media setup now than they did at the time. Because I'm old as hell. I'm 28, so I applied for university, over 10 years ago. But radio and television broadcasting was my preferred program. It was at the top of my list when I applied for universities, and I got waitlisted, and I didn't want to wait, so I took my second offer, which was to do an honors degree in political science. And I worked in politics for a while, and I can't ever raise that without people sending a barrage of political questions my way. But it was funny enough because prior to getting this job, I actually got accepted to go to Ryerson to do a program in urban and regional planning, because I started reading a lot on city building and public infrastructure. And I thought that I've always been fascinated by cities. I think that cities are incredible tools for prosperity and for the betterment of people and society. And I think that they drive progress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that city building is fascinating. So I got accepted to go to Ryerson actually to finish up what I had left of my degree, because I did drop out of my previous political sciences degree in my final year, which was a stupid idea, but whatever. And I was going to be involved in that. I was really passionate and really happy about it. And it was also left the door open for me to possibly do like journalistic work or possibly media work through an urban regional planning lens. And that was essentially what I thought my dream job was going to be. And then ESL called me in my second week of studies, and I basically called Ryerson and I was like, yeah, I got to drop out. Okay, bye. And then I flew to Europe. So
Siege is life, bro.
Siege is literally life for me. Yes. So.
You got any?
I have a few. I mean, BNSFR6 has been very, very patient. This question he's put up over several weeks now. It's a question about bringing back seasonal skins and Pro League skins of the past. I don't know how much of a discussion there is to be had there, because would it be a good idea to bring back skins of the past? I think so. Part of what makes them so desirable is maybe sometimes their rarity. And you think about Black Ice, it's this big thing. Imagine if Black Ice just came back on sale again. It would lose a lot of its desirability. It would lose a lot of its value. So that's, I think, the only counter argument of having skins come back. I don't know if you guys have other thoughts on that.
Aren't they all available in alpha packs? I think that's
Black Ice is, but one that I on this line, the one that I want to come back and be available similar to how Black Ice is now is Glacier. That's what I want back, and it's not Glacier. If you don't have it, you're not ever going to get it.
Yep.
And it's one that I would love to come back. On PlayStation, I have Obsidian, which was a seasonal skin, or well, I guess that was a season pass skin for the first year season pass.
Yep.
I wish I had that on PC. There's no way I can possibly get that. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the problem is that, man, it would be so tempting for them to sell Black Ice, because it would make a lot of money for them. And the fact that they haven't, I think, speaks a lot about their character, as far as how they're handling cosmetics in this game. But if they did, it would also not be as cool anymore.
Well, to play devil's advocate there, you could also have the counter argument that, well, restricting the time window during which you can buy certain skins and sticking to that resolve, just making, if you don't get this within the few weeks or seasons or whatever it is within the season that it's available, that's it. You're not getting a chance again. I think that also kind of puts pressure on people a little bit.
The way that I've always seen it is, I think that for 1 or 2 weeks in the run up to the Invitational, it would be beneficial to bring back a bunch of former skins solely for payment. So what I would do is, if it were up to me, a week or two where you could bring back the Red Crow skins, you could bring back, maybe not Black Ice, because I do think that there's value to that, and Glacier as well. I know that might upset you, but I think that that's fine with those being kept for a time in the past. But some of the older seasonal skins that you maybe didn't have an opportunity to buy, bringing them back for Rainbow Six credits only, or even just straight up cash. Just introduce them like they do the Pro League sets, where you have to pay money for the 4 skins, and all of that money goes in towards a Pro League prize pool. The Invitational is supposed to be a week-long celebration of this game and its history and where this game is going to go. And I don't think there's a bad opportunity there to possibly reintroduce some old seasonal skins, because the exclusivity argument is definitely there. Look at the outcry that happened when they gave the Elite skin for Ashe away for free. People lost their minds because they were basically saying, well, the whole point of Elite skins are that they're exclusive for people who can afford them. And in all reality, I don't really care for that argument. I think it's a stupid argument. Sure, there's an allure to being somebody who has access to something that other people don't. Yeah, hell yeah, being an elitist is great. Hurrah. But I think that it's better for the player base to be able to have access to content that was really honestly well received way back in the day. And if you can generate funds that go in towards a Pro League prize pool or go back in towards funding a specific thing for the game, I don't see any problem with that. One little caveat to that statement, though, is that I would tweak them a little bit. Maybe put some kind of 2019 flair on them, or maybe even put the Invitational logo on that skin, so the people that bought that skin way back in the day are still distinct from the people who bought it recently. So let's say you want to bring back one of my favorite skins that I actually don't have access to is the one from Red Crow. It's the black skin with the red on it and the birds on it. That seasonal skin I think is gorgeous. I don't have access to it. Maybe put the invitational logo and have 2019 written under it and put it somewhere on the skin so that when I do buy that skin, people see it and think, oh, he's not OG enough to have that, which solves the issue that, the people who are going to complain about elitism and stuff like that, they kind of have a bit of a buffer there, but it also allows people to show off the skin that they really like and also display the fact that they helped support Pro League and helped support the Invitational. And on top of that, it's also just marketing for the Invitational, which is always a benefit.
Some pretty decent ideas there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I love it. Here's a quick one for you. Let's get. I really want to hear your thoughts on this one. I forget who asked it. Is Fabian the best player in the world?
I'm on record saying that I think that Pengu is the best player in the world. I think that the one biggest driver behind Fabian is that he has probably, in my opinion, one of the best minds, if not the best mind for the game, and he's able to, in certain rounds, he's able to carry his team while also trying to deal with the rest of what they're doing. But you also got to realize, I don't hear G2's comms. I don't know how much of that team carries themselves. You'd figure with 5 exceedingly smart players on that team, that IGLing is obviously going to be very important. And it might be more important because maybe he has to try to battle egos and be the one to give the definitive call while you've got, 5 cooks in the kitchen. Or maybe the rest of the team just kind of governs and moderates itself and he doesn't need to IGL as much as people would think. I don't really hear the comms, so I don't know. I think that there is definitely a top 5 players list. He is on it in my mind. But I think that overall, the best player in the world year over year in terms of flexibility, in terms of aim, etc. I've always thought that it's been Pengu. And I've been on record saying that multiple times. I think it's a joke and I think it's hilarious that Fabian calls himself the best player in the world. But at the end of the day, I in my opinion, he's a really, really damn good player. Maybe even top 3, but I don't know if he's the best. It's probably Pengu.
I've always thought Pengu. Pengu's, yeah, because he's so flexible. I've always thought that you could give Pengu Ashe and just say go and play Ashe, but he's capable of doing, Montaigne, Smoke, Sophia. He's done so many different roles well.
Yeah. He played something like 15 or 16 or 17 operators at the Invitational, which is an astonishingly high operator pool. Yeah. It's extremely impressive, and he excelled in all of them too. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Right, maybe to round things off, so that we can let you go and go to your basically daytime job in the middle of the night. We talked a little bit about sort of Pro League and things that could be done to sort of make your life easier and make your job easier. Are there sort of things off the top of your head that you could think that would immediately also improve the viewer experience and make it easier for viewers to understand, in addition to things you mentioned earlier?
I hate to say it because I know it'll make a lot of FPS purists very angry, but I think using and utilizing the top-down spectator mode more is a massive benefit to the average viewer.
Haven't they been doing that though in Interro lately? I felt like I've seen it more.
Yeah, absolutely. Marcy's been doing it an awful lot more. Latin America doesn't really use it that much. The Latin America spectator is different, so we don't have control over that. We get a clean feed for that, which is another reason why I would like to have multiple spectator slots so we could have consistency. Not that the guy who runs Latin America, whose name I actually don't know, doesn't do a bad job by any stretch, but there's a familiarity to the way that Marcy does stuff. And I think that helps us. And being familiar with the person who tries to tell a story, because so much of the camera work is also storytelling. Being able to basically sync up and have good synergy with that helps a lot. And I'm very comfortable with Marcy spectating. And it doesn't require a learning curve, to go back and see somebody else spectating a certain way. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Pete. They've been doing more top down, which I think has been excellent, especially in the final 30 to 40 seconds when, anywhere from 5 to 10 people are still alive. I think it's a no brainer to use the top down viewpoint. If it's a XV1 in the final 20 seconds, stick on the 1 always. That's a general rule of thumb. If it's a 3v1, always stick on the one person who's left on his own, because no matter what, you're going to catch the action. Whether they die or they get a kill, it's going to be captured. It's a very safe bet. And it allows us to really also tell a story from their perspective through the tension that's going to be there. And, the adversity that they have to fight through to try and kill those 3 remaining people. Outside of like I said, that hill to die on is going to be that spectator system. Having a CSGO style spectator system, I think would immediately improve almost every facet of this game, from a viewership casting, and player experience. Outside of that, making my job easier, having a pause function would be excellent. The fact that we can't pause the game on the online build is very frustrating because it always leads to rehosts rather than just being able to pause. Yeah, there aren't a ton of things that would immediately pay dividends, I think, in comparison to those two. Outside of a viewership experience, I think that just adopting the Pro League rule set for ranked would cut down on a lot of confusion for viewers, for players. I think people would have more fun with the game. You know, the casual community that gets angry about it, like I said, I think they would just enjoy the game more. And I don't think it needs to be an us versus them thing. But other than that, there's not really anything that's immediate, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think maybe something that's fair to mention in terms of having a Latin American spectator is also, like you mentioned earlier, Marcio can hear you and he can react to whatever you're narrating to either highlight that or show that off or give you information that you're missing. If you're wondering, has he used his smoke canisters? And then he can just quickly flick to smoke and show you that. So, and obviously you do not have that when you're dealing with someone who's sitting on a continent halfway across the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that the fact that Marcio can hear us really helps. And Marcio is also hindered, like I said, by the fact that he can't see what people are doing. Keep in mind that Marcio is just as limited, but it's more important that he knows where everybody is than us, so he can spectate that. And the fact that he can't do that because he doesn't have a second spectator system or a second spectator slot really hurts, I think, his ability to accurately pick the operator that needs to be viewed at that exact moment.
Excellent. Well, with that, I think I want to say thank you so much. Thank you, Interro, for taking the time. I mean, we've mentioned how busy you are, and I think something that's opened our eyes was having some of the pro players on recently, and they mentioned that kind of this forced break that we've had is the first time off they've had, and that I'm sure must apply to you guys as well. So, yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. You're going to be rushing off to cast the North American Pro League right now. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining the stream. Thanks for all the questions. Sorry if we didn't get to all of those. Great stuff. I look forward to editing this together and putting that up on YouTube in case you missed part of the conversation while I was restarting my PC. I'll grab that from someone else's stream and we'll put all that together so you'll have the full experience.
Thanks, Interro. Keep up the great work. Really appreciate you coming on. Really appreciate the work you do on a daily basis. You, as well as Mylosh, Emzo, Kix, everybody else that casts and is progressing this game and the esports aspect of it in the positive direction. Really appreciate you, man.
I would like to say thank you for having me on. I wanted to try to get on. I think you reached out to me in November when I was actually back home, and I had no shortage of time because I was back home getting a new visa to come back to Poland, but I didn't have access to a PC. I would have loved to have been one of the inaugural guests that you had. But the three of you do a great amount of work trying to, like I said, bridge that gap between often adversarial parts of this community. And I think that bridge building really pays off in the long run, and especially while results might not be in the short term, it's especially helpful for the growth of this game. And I am always happy to come back on. I had a blast. So feel free to always extend an invite. I'm happy to do this as often as you'd like. And I really appreciate the thoughtful comments, the commentary, and the contributions, even if I do feel that I was a bit long-winded at times. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, fourth permanent host confirmed.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night and enjoy the Pro League cast later on. Bye for now.